All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May 20th, 2024 City Council meeting for South Burlington, Vermont. We are going to start with agenda item number 1, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. So who hasn't gone in a while? You went last time. I think, Mike, are you feeling up to leading the allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, item number 2, which is instructions on exiting the building in case of emergency and review of technology options. Jesse Baker, City Manager.
Thank you. So for those joining us in the room, in case of emergency, you can go out on either side of the rear of the auditorium and then go left or right to get outside. For those joining remotely, thank you for being here as well. If you'd like to speak during any item on the agenda, please either turn your camera on or indicate that you'd like to speak in the chat, and I'll have the chair call on you. Other than that, we are not monitoring the chat for content.
Thank you. Item number 3, which is agenda review. Does anybody have any additions, deletions, or changes in the order of the agenda items tonight? No? Okay, moving on. Number 4, comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda. Is there anybody online? There is one person. I'll take it there are no comments tonight. Okay. Thank you very much. Item 5, councilors' announcements and reports on committee assignments and the city manager's report. Would somebody like to go first? Mike?
Sure. Okay. I attended this week the South Burlington City Center Collaborative, and I think it's very exciting because I think everyone is very much looking forward to having this city center we've been working towards coming to life, to have a sort of go-to place. Definitely, I think that's true throughout the city. Good news, I was hearing in terms of the participation from the UVM and from the UVM Medical, sort of giving an update on their role in this. They underscored in terms of the UVM, meaning the university, that they'll have 6 buildings in total, with a couple coming online shortly. They will have in total 650 beds, and that's the way to do it. Interesting, the leasing arrangement is not per apartment unit, but per bed. And the priority will be graduate students, though there'll be some possibility for faculty and staff. The UVM Medical said that they have 1 building already up and running, as we know, with 61 apartments. The next one will be open in June with 120 apartments. At a child care facility, though the facility will be just for UVM medical employees. And they also said a cafe, but it was up to the developer to identify the cafe, and it looked like it might even be an extension of Healthy Living Cafe. In their case, their target group is obviously people who are transiting to work for them here in Vermont. Will have the right to stay up to 2 years in these apartments while they look for permanent locations, and this will also be accommodating traveling nurses and people who are here for a short time. Depending on how it goes, they may raise the lease beyond 2 years to allow for more sort of continuity of community here in the city center, depending on the demand for a rotation of their employees. So it sounds like the key thing is that these buildings are being filled, and for the rest of the community, it's not only about ultimately the financial benefit to the revenues for the city, but also the fact that on Market Street and around the corner of some of them from Market Street, we'll have commercial space that is soon hopefully to be occupied. And of course, passing that sign ordinance will help the future employers get it right the first time. But it was very good. I'm really appreciative of the city's active engagement with its staff, with its commitment of $30,000 to help move this forward. And the next meeting, for anyone who's interested, I would encourage those who want to get involved, is the 13th of June at 9 a.m. Sorry? Where is it? It will be. It was here in the city hall. No, I'm sorry. It was 3rd floor. What's the standard big conference room there that most of the meetings are held? I forget the number. I also, like a few other people here, attended or watched this Safe Routes to School working group. I think it was, for me at least, a wonderful example of how the chair ran it, in this case Susan from Locomotive, to just bring the volunteers, to bring in the different voices, to basically pull together enthusiasm of people, because we're so dependent on volunteers to stay engaged and to have truly different views shared. And it was also for me just a wonderful example of the city and the school district working together, and how we basically do have many different responsibilities, but we do have areas that cross over, and if we work together, it's definitely a win-win for everyone. And then I'll leave it up to Andrew to talk about the Economic Development Committee, but I think like the rest of us, I was very happy to receive the request to finally move forward with getting funding for the consultant to get the economic development plan going, which I think will be, like so many of the other cities' plans, an excellent tool to help us in our decisions.
If you want to continue and report on that, I'd be happy, because actually he was not able to attend that reason.
I'm sorry. I need something is going wrong with our technology. Can I just pause us for a quick second and let me see if I can fix this? Thanks. So if folks, for those of you listening in, I'm going to end this go to meeting session and restart it. If you can log back in. Thanks. Bye.
Andrew, actually, I was going to give kudos to you and the rest of the committee. I wasn't there either. I just received the email about that happened, and I prior to Marty, I recall that, and I was just very happy to see it because I know it's something we've been working towards a year, and this basically gets the ball rolling. So kudos to everyone involved in the committee. That's it. Thank you.
To identify and review what we think are safe routes to each of the schools, using a 1 mile radius for the elementary schools and a 2 mile radius for the middle school and high schools. When after we do that, the thought would be identify the problem spots, problem crossings, other things that maybe are safety issues that could be improved, where we might need a crossing guard. Take all that information, feed it into our bike ped committee, who would then combine it with everything else that bike ped is working on for one combined list of priorities for the city. And we started now to do that for Rick Marcotte and started to review the routes and started to review the hot spots and the problems crossing. It was very interesting. A lot of good information. I think a lot of good will come out of that. We also discussed what I'm going to call the Elson Parkway Greenway, which is a project that Bike Ped has been thinking about apparently for a couple of years as a pilot safe route to school, safe route to the middle school, high school complex from Elson Parkway, passes through Prouty Parkway, down O'Brien Drive. There's a bunch of crossings that are problematic. What they'd like to do is set up a proposed kind of pilot route with temporary signs, kind of temporary safety measures around the crossings, get the community used to that. Seemed like a great idea to me. It's going to be all volunteer work. Locomotion is very excited to help us with that project. They want the council to review and approve that, so if neighbors call and ask questions, we can say, yeah, the council approved it. So hopefully that will be on our agenda coming soon. I also went down to Szymanski Park to just assess. I did take a decibel monitor with me on my phone, and I have to say, I stood near the backyards of the two nearest homes. At this time of year, they're very well insulated from the tennis pickleball courts by lots of trees and leaves, which may not be the case, say, in March or November, but at least now on my phone it barely registered. I mean, you could hear it in the sense that okay, it's going on, but it didn't get above 45 decibels on my phone. So not anything that I think in normal noise ordinance, normal noise ordinance would indicate as a problem. Then I did also have the opportunity to talk to a bunch of people on the pickleball courts, and just ask folks to be extra vigilant, extra slow, just be extra careful, extra courteous. There were a couple suggestions that they had, which is to put more speed limit signs so people know what the speed limit is in that area. I guess people weren't sure. Maybe indicate if there's places where folks shouldn't park, or maybe stripe where folks can park, things like that. And so, just had that conversation. I'm looking forward to us discussing that as a council at some point. So that's it.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Tim. I did attend the school board meeting, the recent one, and there was a review of the election results and a number of new hires that are going on. And the kind of newly constituted board is moving forward on a number of initiatives. So kind of stay tuned on that. I also attended the Planning Commission meeting. I don't know if you were at that, Andrew, or not, but continued progress on kind of aligning efforts in LDRs with the Home Act and S100 and Act 147. I don't know if they're all synonymous now, but probably the biggest area that some progress was made is I had been working with the schools as part of our initial community engagement conversations about we were talking about the potential for this coffee with a counselor type of venue to have listening sessions. So, I know several House representatives in the past have used business venues like Panera or Duke's Public House and others for kind of Saturday morning type events. So I really felt like the schools would be great venues if they were accessible. So the plan right now is Mike and I have locked in a number of dates, basically alternating Saturdays right now at Orchard and Chamberlain schools, Saturday morning. And our goal will be to have a number of those through the summer and maybe into the early fall and report back to council on kind of the draw from the community and as well as kind of the feedback that's coming in. But hopefully, if that turns out to be a sustainable venue for soliciting community feedback, we can alternate participation from the council in those Saturday morning scenarios. But right now, that's the plan. We're going to try it and have it positioned at those two schools and just see if there can't be some additional participation and engagement.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Anything else? That's it? Okay. It's been 2 weeks, and in that 2 weeks, the day after the last meeting, we worked the election. Did you work the election? No, you didn't. But Elizabeth did. Did you work the election? Yeah. But Mike wasn't around, so yeah. So some of us did. Lori didn't either, by the way. And as you know, the budget passed. I worked at Chamberlain. I also have made 3 visits to Szymanski Park, and just using my own subjective poor hearing at this age, got close to the trees, went around on the street side as well, and at those times I went, 3 of the 4 pickleball courts were engaged. The cars were anywhere from 5 to 11 cars parked either in the parking lot or on the street, and it didn't bother me, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't bother somebody else. I didn't have my professional sound meter with me, which I can take on another occasion. I also had the opportunity to visit the Wheelock Bridge, which you're probably going to talk about. But I'll let you for it. But when I got there, it was closed. I took some pictures. There's some rust underneath. There's some rotted boards and rusted out, side rails that were gone. But I'll let the city manager talk about that. I also went to the Common Area for Dogs Committee meeting last week, but I could only stay for an hour because then there was a planning commission meeting. And at that meeting, we got to see Helen really fully seated after being appointed by the city council in a vote in public. And they had a really good discussion. It was very spirited about the proposals to make the EV charger requirements more stringent than what the state is requiring, so that we have EV capable, so at least run the conduit where we need to, and have it EV ready for maybe the private residential garages. But so that was a good discussion. Also, I was remote for the Safe Routes to School. It was the first time I've attended that. I couldn't stay for the whole thing. I attended the OnLogic grand opening. If you didn't know, the building was open last week, and there were a lot of people there. So Becca Ballant was there, Elizabeth was there, Mike was there, Jesse was there, Paul was there, Marla was there. Stephen, were you there? Okay, he wasn't there.
Peter Welch was
but
there.
Peter Welch was there, and Mike Pisak was there, and a lot of other people too. But do you know other people that were there?
Lots of other people there, but
Yeah.
I was going to say something else about it. Lots of South Burlington love.
Yes.
A lot of
Yes, there was.
praise.
So there were some very nice comments made about the city and their cooperation in getting that building to be built, which was great. And they didn't talk about the quality of the building at all. So I went and asked Sean Larkin, their CEO, and I said, "So tell me about, is the building energy efficient?" He goes, "The roof is loaded with solar, and we drilled wells for geothermal. So that bodes well for that building." And I said, "Is it LEED certified?" He goes, "I think it's above any LEED certification, but I didn't
My
get
understanding
details."
is net zero.
Yeah, I would assume
Yeah.
so. Yeah, so that's really great. And I think that's all I have. Thank you, Jesse.
So a couple of things for me today. I'm going to ask you at the end of the meeting about a special meeting on June 10th for interviews, so teeing that up. So the legislative session has ended, although there is a planned veto session. We are tracking a number of bills through the process to see if they pass into law, if they're signed into law, or go back to the veto session. One of the ones I think will pass into law is the municipal ethics bill. So it creates some pretty significant changes for local government. It creates a statewide municipal code of ethics. As you know, you adopt your own code of ethics every year. That will now go away, and the state code will come in. It will have training requirements for elected and appointed officials. It will require us to appoint an ethics liaison and to take claims and investigate them. Those will go into place in a phased approach through January 1 and September next year. So we have some time to prepare for it, but it will be a shift for us. We're also following very closely the yield bill. It's very likely that the yield bill will get vetoed. Hopefully they are ready to go with an updated yield bill on the 17th. If not, and that drags on, we may be faced with the challenge that municipalities have had in past years about sending out tax bills. So we have to receive the education property tax rate from the state in order to issue our tax bills, and we are required to give 30 days notice to property taxpayers before those are due. So when that date gets pushed back, we have to manage our cash flow in a different kind of way, and Martha is very good at that. We're also tracking the housing bills and the Act 250 bill. There's still some question about how that will move forward. That while it doesn't have huge significant changes for South Burlington, it may give us some options around Act 250 that the council may want to talk about at a later date. Nothing before the end of June, but that we are tracking that. And then we are also likely to see quite a few public safety improvements pass into law or be signed into law. I just want to take a moment to thank Representative Lalonde and Chief Burke for the work they did this session to tighten up some of those statutes that will really help our retail community and help, I hope, some of our neighbors in crisis get to treatment more quickly. So those are the things we are tracking as we come out of the session. Yes, the pedestrian bridge is back open. I know it felt like a long time for the community, and I don't want to undermine that, especially for those who use that as a commuting path. But it was a pretty quick turnaround by Public Works to get an engineer to recognize that there was a significant public safety issue, get an engineer in place, come up with a solution, collect the materials, and make the change. So we are good for about 3 to 5 years. We will need to add that bridge to the CIP this budget cycle. It's right now about a $300,000 price tag, likely quite more than that by the time we get to do the work. And that is not currently on the CIP. So that is heads up that is coming as part of your FY26 budget.
I rode the bridge this weekend. It felt quite sturdy.
Oh, good. And a huge thanks to Tom and Adam and the team for getting that replaced. For those tracking other agendas, as Mr. DePietro walks in, the Dorset Street Water Tank Project is on the DRB agenda this week, which is an exciting path forward. Steve was mentioning earlier that we are installing a new public Wi-Fi system here at City Hall to enable more access to our neighbors that will not have a password, be more accessible. It will still have the same level of security all of our other networks do. We are in the final stages of selecting a vendor for our permit modernization process. Paul and Tom and Steve have been working on this a lot. This is a process that will enable folks to apply for permits online, be able to track the status of those online, automate our review process, and greatly improve our ability to report on data out of the permitting system. So our hope is over the summer to finalize that contract and start that migration. Jennifer and Adam, Library Director and Recreation Parks Director, are fine-tuning plans for the week of Juneteenth. They're doing a number of both recreational and educational events. Please, I'll be sure that gets to you, but please do keep your eyes on that. They're doing a lot of work to put together a good series of events for the community. And I just want to make sure that on your radar screens and the community's radar screens were the Exit 14 Interchange Scoping Study meeting on the 22nd. This is a very conceptual early planning meeting for the future of that busiest intersection. On Thursday, May 30th is the City Green workshop here in the auditorium. On the 29th, the library is co-hosting the film Just Getting By here in the auditorium as well. That's the film that Sandy Dooley was mentioning in public comment a couple of, yes, it's Bess O'Brien's film, a couple of months ago. And then in good but less fun news, the library is closed on Saturday for carpet cleaning, for our annual carpet cleaning. So we are broadcasting that far and wide, but please don't come to the library on Saturday. So June, going back to where I started, we have appointment application requests out right now for all of our regulatory bodies, so Planning Commission, DRB, Sextons, etc. We anticipate 13, there are 13 vacancies, so we anticipate more than that applicants. You have very busy June meetings, so Tim and I talked about holding a special meeting the week of June 10th solely for the purpose of conducting those interviews. So I want to see when a quorum of you would be available for those.
The week of June 10th.
June 10th. We have options Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday night for rooms. So anything Monday, Wednesday, or Thursday would work, not Tuesday or Friday.
I can do Monday.
Monday the 10th.
My preference would be the 13th, but if people can't do that, then Monday, I guess.
A little louder?
Thursday would be
Better for you?
better, but if people can't do Thursday, Monday.
I have a conflict.
Okay, then I'll rework my Monday. I have something, but I think I can. Actually, let me just say, in principle, can make Monday. I'll need to see if I can rearrange an obligation.
Is Lori back?
Yes.
Okay. So 6:30?
Elizabeth, is that one?
Yes, I can do either of those.
Okay. We will aim for the 10th at 6:30. Thank you.
Jesse, can I ask a question? Or
Yeah.
I was under the impression we might be getting some recommendations from you and staff on committee consolidation in May.
So we are meeting with the committee chairs at the end of May, and then
Okay.
you will get recommendations from us after that. We want to talk to the committee chairs before we make those recommendations.
So will we have any additional information prior to these interviews?
So these interviews will not. The positions we're interviewing or we're collecting candidates for now are the statutory committees that will not change. So Planning Commission, DRB, what else is on that list? Library trustees, Sextons. It's not your policy committees. We are not advertised for any of the policy committees yet.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And then Tim, that's what I had. I might suggest you go back to public comment because of our technical difficulties. I don't know, more people are on now.
Sure. Let's go back to item number 4, which is comments and questions from the public not related to the agenda. Is there anybody that wants to speak? We have Matt and Linda and Michelle. That's it? Okay. So we'll move on to, are you finished?
I'm finished.
Okay.
Thank you.
Move on to item number 6, which is the consent agenda. Elizabeth, how do you feel about the consent agenda tonight?
Would you like us to walk through some of those answers?
To the extent I had questions on the consent agenda, that would be helpful.
Okay. So Martha is here. So Councilor Fitzgerald sent us some really excellent questions earlier in the day that I did not read last night about financial questions on the consent agenda. Martha, do you have that pulled up for yourself?
I do.
So why don't I first read the items on the consent agenda and then not ask for a motion until this interview goes on, and then we'll go back to that, okay? So item A, consider and sign disbursements. Item B, receive the third quarter financials. Item C, receive the April financials. And finally, D, approve a clarification on the date of the second reading and second public hearing to the proposed amendments to the sign ordinance. So who has the questions?
So Martha has them. Do you want to just walk through them quickly?
All of them, or are there specific questions that I should be addressing?
I think you should probably walk through all of them.
Okay. First question was on clarity on the full amount of surplus 1.5 interest 691,000 ARPA fund, which may be discussed for allocation to various city needs. The criteria and timing for consideration of the funding recommendations request. So I broke that down to 3 different categories based on interest, 1.5 million surplus, and ARPA fund. On the ARPA fund, we have it on the agenda to be discussed June 3rd. Was wondering if it's okay to leave that out for tonight until we have that information on June 3rd. Is
And-
that
And
okay
just
with
in
you?
terms of timeline for ARPA, you have to make allocation decisions on that by the end of December, and then spend the money by December 2026. So you have 6 months left to go through that process.
And I'm sorry, what's the total again on that?
It's about 2 million.
Total of what is left?
On the ARPA funds?
The current balance that is unallocated is about 2 million.
Okay. So I was just looking for clarity on the surplus of 1.5 million, the interest of 691,000, and then the 2 million approximately of the ARPA funds, and that has a timeline on it.
So only the ARPA has the timeline. The rest will roll over to the fund balance and is your savings account for as you decide.
Yeah. Okay.
And the interest of 691 is included in that 1.5 million.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? You cited in the report, this sort of positive trajectory in a few areas. I was just wondering, is that then factored into planning for the budget this coming year? That sort of realigns our trajectories that in these particular areas there are higher revenues, and therefore, because I'm just thinking back to the last budget vote, which was a 2% vote, and I'm sure all of us are going to be very much focused on how to minimize sort of the tax bite going forward. So is that just automatic, or how does it work? Are any of these things that suggest better revenue possibilities going forward?
Yes, they do. And we do go based on what we've received and what we foresee coming with the interest on. We did talk to the representative of bank to see what they are foreseeing happening in the next year and a half. And based on what we have earned so far, what the interest rate is currently is, and what they would be recommending. And so that amount was adjusted for FY25 budget.
And I just wanted to ask a question, particularly Steve. I saw in the fire department, the ambulance. So it's not cost reimbursement. I was just trying to understand how that was revenue generating.
Yeah, so it's considered more like a fee for service. So you set rates, we charge those rates. If it's a Medicare or Medicaid patient, there's a mandatory write-off, and we balance bill, but we do not do collections. So most of it is from insurance company payments.
What do you mean when you say write-off? That the Medicare, Medicaid only pays a certain amount, so you bill here and they only pay this, so you take that and leave it. Okay.
Exactly.
And that policy was approved by the council last year.
So can I continue that? Do you have any questions? Or?
Not on that.
Okay.
I had a couple others that are related to the consent agenda.
Okay. My question is for the interest that we earned this year, right? Or is it easier to project next year what that interest might be? I mean, we could see a slight decline in deposit rates, but would you know roughly how much cash you would have sitting in an account to generate that interest?
It's really tough to project because it is based on what we have in the account, and what we have in the account mostly is determined by when the property tax payment comes in. And during those months when the interest rates are down, the interest on might be down.
Okay.
And so when I had the discussion with our representative at the bank, based on what we currently have and based on what we've had consistently in the account, that's what we based the FY25 amount on.
And were we far off on the quantity of electrical inspections that got done this year?
those generally are, so the timing could be an issue. Last year, if you remember, especially planning and zoning, we had a lot of surplus on the DRB planning. And that was because they paid ahead when the permits were being issued for the project that would be done this year. And I think Paul explained that in the narrative.
So they come in waves, right?
Certainly like the permitting fees the fire department charges one or two. This street has paid a lot of money. Beta paid a lot of money on Logic. If we don't have one of those big projects hit next year,
Right.
and we have raised our projections from 600,000 the year I started to 1.3 million for next year. So, we're, to your point, Mike, I think we've done a really good job about trying to do our best to project accurate revenues in all of our funds to lessen the dollars we take from taxpayers.
If I can just underline one point that Martha put in this response to you that's in your inbox that I think is really illustrative of why we are harping on the earned interest surplus, is that in 2020 we were collecting 0.3% interest on what we had in the bank. Today we're collecting 4.48%. That is wildly different on the millions of dollars we have in the bank. When we talk to the bankers about what's a more realistic thing to budget for, that's what we're budgeting for, a little more conservatively. But we do not feel comfortable budgeting. I won't feel comfortable budgeting FY26 numbers at 4.5% because it is very unlikely that will continue, which is why that's such a kind of special bucket of one-time funds. It's not one-time funds we are likely to get in the future.
There was also a comment about the tax, what's it called?
Local options.
Local options tax. Is that perceived as a trajectory that is sustainable? Is not as fluid as you're suggesting the interest rates clearly are, depending on what the Fed does?
Yeah, those have been consistent, and they really went down during COVID, and they have been coming up from the COVID taxes that were collected. So those are depending on the sale and mails, room and mail and sale taxes. And as of now, from FY 2020 through FY 24, those have been consistently growing.
I guess, thank you. Michael, is it consistently growing in terms of returning to pre-COVID levels, or is there a dynamic in terms of economic development in the community that suggests that those levels are actually increasing, reflecting greater business activity in South Burlington?
I have not looked at it that way, but I'm happy to do that analysis. But yes, they have been growing, and part of it could be attributed to the growth in the community, what is happening right now, and part of it could just be contributed to the fact that the economy is growing as well. And there are a lot of sales and room and mail happening.
And also the revote, the two revotes on the school budget. The last one was only 5,000. The previous one was 6,700. So I suppose that just means that Holly had fewer people employed in the polls.
Yeah,
Because there were just fewer people to work the polls, probably. Like they just weren't here. And so the rest of us had to like soldier on for 14 hours. It's it's normal.
yeah, funny you should ask. She actually anticipated that question coming, and their response was that yes, the May 7th process was more streamlined, and this was a second time going through the reward process. The first time when it happened, there was a consultant fee attached to it, so she had Donna Campbell come in to help. But this time around, she did not need her, and she did not need many people as they were needed.
Okay. Elizabeth, you had some more questions? Or?
I think, Martha, you've got a couple others. I had a question on, and I'm sorry these didn't go out to everybody, but Tim, you got them and Jesse got them. Just a question on the healthcare claims. My past experience has been really around the premiums being fixed and the claims only affecting out of pocket. So not knowing the city plan, there was an indication that clarified that I just wanted clarification that claims are under 74%. which to me is an indication of potentially the benefits of some of the wellness programs that are implemented within the city. And then I thought the workers' comp was done in arrears, so why it fell short was just curious. I was just curious to clarify that.
Yes, so it is done on an estimate basis. So we estimate what our wages and salaries would be for the year, and that's how the premium is based on. And at year end, we provide the actuals to the audit to the insurance agency, and they send them to their auditors that looked at what was estimated and then what the actuals were, and then compare what the amount the premium should have been based on the actuals, and net out what the estimated premium was. And I think, like I indicated in that response back, in the past, it has resulted in the insurance company paying the city, but this year, FY23, was one of those years that was off that resulted in the city owing that amount of money.
Right, thank you.
And mostly, too, I should add that the wages that they considered is not just the work wages, it does include retirement. If people retired and there are final payout, those are included as wages. And we had a lot of retirement in FY23.
Do we need a clarification of the difference between workers' compensation insurance and workman's comp? Would that be helpful? Because I don't know if I know the difference. I mean, I thought the workman's comp was something you paid to the state through, as a payroll tax, but I don't know. This is different? This is another piece of insurance?
I think it is the only workman's comp. This is for the city, for the employees here. What we paid to the state, I'm not sure we paid anything to the state for that matter. What we do pay though is an employment insurance, which is separate from the workers' comp.
Okay.
Yeah, our workers' comp insurance is our insurance for our workers' comp claims.
Okay. But the state has a role in that, right? Or they have some role?
They have a VOSHA role.
Oh,
So
okay.
if we have a workers' comp claim, they come and make sure that the other employees are that we're not violating some
Okay,
kind of employment safety law.
Okay. All right. I understand. Thanks. Any other questions? Are we ready to make a motion? Oh,
There was also another question on the city's
Oops.
practices on the accruals. The questions read, in general, what is the city practice if expenses are budgeted but not incurred in an operating year? Can those be accrued? If budgeted and incurred but not billed in the operating year. So our budget is categorized into 3 categories: wages and benefits, operating, and capital. Wages and operating budget, if not spent, rolls into the general fund. And if we had a contract for anything within those 2 categories, if the contract is signed before June 30th, we could accrue. If anything is ordered, even if it's not been paid or received yet, but we've ordered it by June 30th, we can accrue it. Okay. But if we do not have any of those, then it rolls into fund balance. For the capital budget, the City Council in 2022 approved or amended, updated the capital improvement policy to allow for any budgeted capital funds to be transferred into a CIP to the capital reserve fund. And whether it's spent or not spent, in regard of whether we have a contract or not have a contract, we move those funds at the year end to the reserve fund.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. And then there was also another question that says,
I think the last one I had, and Jesse, I can work with you to if some of these are not of interest to the rest of the council, but just the historical weighting of quarterly expenses relative to the budget. I've seen there were several things that said we're going to incur 40% of the budget spending in the last quarter. It wasn't literally that, but just the weighting of, in general, it wasn't literally after 3 quarters, 75%. It was different for different departments, and some as low as like 40%. But a lot of it was catching up by the fourth quarter to budget. Is there a standard weighting for city budgets?
There is no standard weighting, but some of the, like the recreation department, I think is a good example. If you looked at their budget and where they are currently, a lot of their activities would be happening now after the snow, and the weather is getting warm and they're getting ready to get to open the fields. That's when they would be incurring a lot of budgeted expenses. So you would see that they are under 75% at the end of the third quarter, but come fourth quarter, all that will be spent.
Great, thank you. And I think the department reports explain some of that by department, which was helpful. And I just give kudos to the process that was used for the department summaries. I really appreciated that as a newer counselor.
All Martha. Thank you, Martha.
And the
Thank you.
department head, so thank you. And we are always improving these processes. If you have anything in mind that you would like to see represented differently, let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. So,
Just
Mr. Scanlon?
one question, not for Martha separately. This is actually for Paul. I wasn't here for the last session as I was overseas on a business conference, but I had with sign ordinance, and I did watch the video. But I having watched the video, a question I just would have had for him that. So if you guys just give me 2 minutes, I just want to clarify. Paul, when you briefed us the first time, and as I told you, very supportive of the city ordinance, you briefed the economic committee a while back when I was on it. But at the time you briefed us, you suggested that perhaps the business community needed a little more time to come up to speed or to socialize it. And did you, then were you able to find out that everything is pretty well understood?
I reached out to our contact with the South Burlington Business Association and also the property owners immediately here to let them know about the upcoming hearings and if they had any questions, and I've not heard any feedback. So
Good. That's good news then.
We've heard from
Excellent.
one business owner.
Oh yes, one business owner asked a couple of questions, but did not have a specific statement. They just asked some clarifying questions.
That's
for
great
us.
news, especially since the idea of to get this place going in the city center soon. This is very timely. So, great. Thank you
Yeah,
for sharing
absolutely.
So I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
We have a motion and we have a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to item 7, which is participate in a facilitated conversation with assembly theory on how the city uses data and how the council may want to receive data in the future to make policy decisions, with Jesse Baker and Brian Lowe from Assembly Theory. Does it also include the generation of the data? It has use and reception. But anyway.
So so if I could just do a little bit of place setting, we generate a lot of data already. So I'd like to introduce Brian Lowe from Assembly Theory. He will talk more about who he is and his experience, but just by way of why he's here tonight and why Steve and I move forward with this data strategy contract. So as you know, in the FY24 budget, we added a GIS data analyst position to the budget. We have had a very challenging time recruiting for that position, in part because we had a hard time defining what the goal of our data strategy was going to be and how that was going to be operationalized in our team. Brian and I share the past resume of working in what's called a city step program, or as analysts for municipalities looking at the data of the municipality. So we use some of the salary lag money we had, because we have not filled that position, to bring Brian on to work across stakeholders on our team to look at the data we have in our team and help us develop a data strategy moving forward. A big part of that strategy that the department heads came up with was wanting to make sure that you all had the data you needed to make policy decisions and then evaluate policy decisions. So part of the contract with Brian is this conversation with you all to make sure that as we're building that strategy, your needs are also met. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian.
Hey, thank you very much, Jesse, and hello, everybody. So as Jesse said, I'm representing Assembly Theory here tonight, which is a consulting firm, and my goal is to give you an overview of the work and timeline for this data strategy roadmap project, and get your input about what information will be most useful to you as we build this here in South Burlington. So Jesse, do you mind advancing the slide?
Maybe.
I wanted to give a kind of brief introduction about some of the relevant work that I've done in the past when it comes to this data strategy project. And so that's what this slide shows. Before living in Vermont, I used to work at the U.S. Department of Treasury and in the Navy Reserve, and overseas in a couple different civilian roles with that kind of focus as it's listed there on the slide. After moving to Vermont, I ended up working as the Chief of Staff and the Chief Innovation Officer and the COVID Response Leader in Burlington. And maybe more importantly for this conversation, helped stand up the department and then actually oversee Burlington's BTV stat or city stat data strategy. So I've got a lot of direct experience with data in Vermont municipalities and more broadly. And now, after 2 years at the state level, I'm working with Vermont Council on Rural Development. I've started this business, Assembly Theory, kind of tying together a couple of these different experiences, really focused on project management, data analysis, and AI integration work. So I'm excited to be here working with the team here. And in a kind of funny full circle thing, when we stood up the Burlington program, we modeled it after some of what happened in Somerville, Massachusetts, which was a gold standard program for the country. And Jesse actually led that program back before coming to Vermont. So happy to be here tonight. So what is a data strategy? A data strategy is a long-term plan for using data to advance the goals of an organization, right? And what that means in practical terms is it's about building and nurturing a culture of putting data alongside common sense to help make good judgments and improve outcomes that a community wants to see. It's really about a kind of cultural change. And here, because there's so much good work already happening within different departments, it's a lot about kind of building a coherent system to efficiently leverage the data that the city team already has. If you go to the kind of, on this particular slide, you see these three pillars, and these are the kind of foundation of what makes a data strategy work. For this kind of collection of data to be used efficiently to have any purchase, you really need to have clear and compelling goals. You have to have a clear sense of what you're trying to achieve. You've got to have clear principles and roles, right? Like nothing breeds resentment like unclear expectations, right? So you want to have a really clear sense of what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to accomplish it, what the roles and culture are of how you're going to do it. And you need to have really clear established metrics for what the data is that you need and the outcomes that you want to see tracked. Thanks, Jesse. Do you mind going to the next slide as well? And I'm also happy to take questions as we go. Like I'm happy to run through the presentation and take questions at the end, or if people have questions as we go, happy to pause and take those. So on this slide, you can see that, if that's what a data strategy is, and that's what a data strategy foundation requires, how do you actually think about building an effective data strategy? And I like to kind of start with the outcome in mind. And so for a data strategy itself, what you want is a straightforward, clear process that has the ability to evolve. And so this slide gives you kind of the 6 steps that you'd see in a data strategy. The first being you need to identify the data that you're going to need to advance the goal that you've articulated. You're going to need to figure out how you collect that data in a coherent way. You're going to need to think about how you analyze and use the data that you've collected. You're going to think about how you share that both within your organization and to external partners like the councilor or the community. You have to think about how you store and manage that data, because great if you have it, but if nobody knows where it is and no one can access it, it's not worth that much. And then you want to think about, again, how it's linking back to those goals. And those goals may change. And one thing that I just would emphasize about these different kind of data strategies, it's really important in that sharing and analysis to be open to the possibility that you might find new data beyond what you were looking for, or new goals or new needs. That happens a lot in the analysis and use phase of this process. It also happens in the sharing process. There may be community partners or members of the council that have ideas that are generated by that, and you want to be thinking about that and pulling that back, represented by those 2 different lines, the blue and the green, back to the beginning of the process and thinking about what you need to identify to move things forward. So it's a process that needs to have clear and compelling goals. It needs to have a coherent effort to collect the data that you need, and it's got to have buy-in from the team that's doing this work, and it needs to be iterative. It needs to hold open space for evolution of those goals. Next slide, please, Jesse. So if you're going to do something like this, you have to be really transparent that it is not possible to collect all the data that you might want at the exact same time in a way that is constantly updated, right? There are limits to staff capacity, and so you've got to make choices about what you collect. And you want to make choices that are goal dependent. You want data that reflects the goals that you've established, and you want to have this kind of second pathway, right? This possibility that in addition to collecting data to evaluate the goals that you have articulated, that you are open to this possibility that additional questions might be generated by the data that you are collecting, right? And so a good example of that is just a recent one is in Burlington. You started by looking at kind of major costs. And Jesse, the slides have disappeared, just so you know.
Hey, Travis, can you move the slides back on? I think they.
I'll keep rolling. Oh, great. Thank you. I don't know who did that, but it was wonderful.
Travis.
So this, an example from the Burlington Fire Department a couple of years ago, often cities start by looking at personnel costs, which are usually one of the major expenses that a city carries. And you can think about that many different ways. One way is to start looking at overtime costs. In Burlington, they looked at overtime costs and realized that, the fire department had very high overtime costs, and it would be a bad process if it stopped there, right? They asked a number of additional questions, like why these high overtime costs? And it turned out that they were pulling people in who were off duty pretty constantly to make up for staffing shortfalls. It was extremely expensive. It was terrible for morale. And the chief at the time did some analysis and realized that if you were to hire some additional staff into the fire department, you would actually save the city money, you would improve morale in the department, and you would improve the quality of service outcomes in the community. And so that's what the city did. And that's a good example of how, it wasn't the initial goal of the process to look at fire overtime, but by starting at this kind of clear goal of reducing costs to the community, they were able to identify very clear and useful examples of how to do that. Next slide, please. In South Burlington, thinking about what are the goals, the team here has identified a number of different areas to start. And that is kind of, they're looking at data that will help advance overall city goals that have been articulated well in, for example, the 2024 municipal plan, data that helps enhance communication with the community and the council, data that helps understand what's happening in our community here. It's a growing community. What does that mean in terms of operational impacts to South Burlington? It's a process that should help identify areas where the team can focus its attention to have the greatest impact, whether that's in terms of cost or equity or energy savings. And it's got to be a process that helps track outcomes so you can know what's working and what's not. Ultimately, a data strategy should be oriented to help with policy decisions and day-to-day operational decisions that help achieve the results that the community wants, whether that is improved service provision, efficiencies in the form of cost or time savings, or clear priorities within existing resources. Next slide, please. And I promise I'll have you all speak in just a moment. I'm almost done with the process here. This slide is really about just putting it together. You need to gather from the city team a clear sense of what the data is that they need, a clear sense from the city team and city leadership about what they're trying to accomplish, and hopefully tonight some input from you as counselors about what you see the community needs are when it comes to policy decisions. I want to marry that with drafting a really clear and actionable data strategy roadmap document, and we need to match that in with what Jesse alluded to at the very beginning, finding an analyst who can help execute on this work. So those are the kind of three major component parts. And the next slide maps that to a timeline. And so we started the work about a month ago, and we have kind of ongoing conversations with different city department heads. We hope to get your input tonight and begin mapping out that into a clear, actionable document. There'll be some revision back and forth, and you can see it's designed in a way that should allow for a future hiring process to be informed by the completion of this draft data strategy roadmap. So the last slide, I think here, is a slide for you all. Thank you. And this is from a memo that you received from me a couple days ago. Really, the focus is on pages 2 and 3 of that memo. And it's a question, what kind of data would help you evaluate as counselors policy decisions in the areas that come to council most often? So things like affordable South Burlington, housing policy questions, climate mitigation questions. What kind of data would help you evaluate those decisions that you need to make in those areas most effectively, and in terms of how to prioritize the impacts that your decisions might have, or to weigh different choices relative to one another. And so in that memo, you've gotten both a kind of written analysis of that, but then an appendix that kind of consolidates what I've been able to collect so far as kind of data requests that have come from various council committees into the city. And so I hope that's a helpful guiding document, but it'll be really helpful to hear and discuss with you what would make a data strategy like this most effective for you as counselors. So, and that is where I'm going to stop for now. I'm happy to take questions on this concept or process, or really focus on some of the policy dimensions and what could be most helpful to you.
Questions? You have questions?
Good.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I think this is great, incredibly important, and incredibly useful. So I was focusing on the appendix, and there's already some, I think it's a very good foundation for metrics that we could use. I'm going to throw out a few more for consideration, for us to discuss. So on climate, it'd be really good to do some kind of regular, I don't know if it has to be annual, but a regular update of the ultimate goal, our greenhouse gas emissions, right? How are we doing, right? We had a goal to reduce 60% of the 2019 by 2030. That's kind of where the rubber meets the road. So greenhouse gas emissions. Then, Jesse, I see you pulled together some of the metrics. I think there's also some metrics around EVs that we could add. What percent of our fleet is EVs? What percent of new cars sold are EVs, either full electric or plug-in hybrid? So that's around climate. I'd love to see some metrics. I see you have population growth. I don't know if we can do student growth to focus in on student growth. I'd also love to, I don't know if we can do this, but some metric around traffic. Because to me, it goes to like a quality of life question. You know, how long does it take to get places? Is it getting worse? Or is it about the same? And do we need to think about where people are living, or how our roads are, or what our growth trajectory is? I'd love some metrics around cost of living and comparing our community to other communities. You know, are our housing costs more or less than others? Our taxes, our food, insurance, childcare, all those different things, and how does it all roll up at the end of the day? And how do we compare to other communities along those different parameters? Because I think that will help us then focus in on what levers that we can employ possibly to affect some of those dimensions. With respect to our municipality, I'd love to do some benchmarking of how efficient we are or not relative to other communities our size in providing the services that we provide. Are we, our departments bigger? Are they smaller? Are our costs higher or less for providing those functions? That would be really helpful to me. And then finally, when I drive around, I think our roads are pretty good, but I know from residents, people have different views on how good our roads are. You know, what percent of our roads are in good shape and in bad shape, and how does that percent compare to like how other communities in Vermont are able to maintain their roads? Are we better than other communities, worse? That kind of stuff. So I'll stop there.
So when I was chief of staff in Burlington, I remember, I don't think I left the city for like 3 years back in like 2015 to 2018. And I remember I hit a pothole in South Burlington and I was like, they have potholes here too. Like, because, it's where you live is where you see, so.
Vermont is tough on your roads.
Yeah.
I found preparing for this kind of overwhelming, and part of it was not really understanding, have we done an audit of what data are available right now? So an understanding on a routine basis, this data is collected or these data are collected, on a quarterly, annual, every 5-year basis, and what are the trends? What are we seeing right now? So I feel like a baseline would help inform me personally to help provide feedback. Where I went with this, and I think as Andrew said, sort of, data informed decision making makes sense to me, as it affects policy, as it affects a number of other things. I would kind of go back to the city plan as a bit of a guideline around where data might inform the effectiveness and sort of measuring outcomes. The gap to me in some of your discussion is one is data used to sort of evaluate or monitor policy, but the other area is how do you utilize data to identify need? And that is a bit of a gap from my standpoint, and I can't articulate. Well, actually, Andrew gave some good examples of how that might be articulated. Because again, this just seems so broad to me. I think the city plan there, I would also personally, I would look to staff and our city manager to say, where don't we have data in terms of implementing some of the policies and some of the goals identified in the city plan, knowing that some of those are not fully fleshed out yet as well. And the couple of areas that I don't think Andrew mentioned were really, well, I think we talked about affordability and housing. I can't give you specific examples of data that would address that, but that would be an area. I think economic development, there were some things in the index that were identified. There may be some employment measures there. There may be some relative wage information there. Climate, I think, has been talked about. There are some more measurable goals there and metrics that were identified. But cultural engagement is the other big area to me, or community engagement in the broader sense. And again, it's more of a question for me of where are we missing information that would be a barometer of community engagement and kind of cultural integration, and how would that be articulated as a metric within the city plan? Because I think those are gaps right now that we have some efforts to close those gaps, but can we be looking at data right now to help close the gaps?
Do you mind if I repeat back some of that to make sure I'm capturing it all?
Sure.
Just that what I'm hearing you say is that it is an overwhelming effort to think about all the potential possible data sources that a city has, right? And so we have to start somewhere. And I'm hearing you and Councilor Chalnick say that the focus on climate and data related to climate is important, but that you are identifying a gap when it comes to kind of cultural engagement. Are there more metrics that we could be thinking about when it comes to cultural engagement and adding that in here?
And community engagement, specifically too.
Mike, any comments?
I share the view that this is just fantastic. This is wonderful. I've seen not in Somerville, Massachusetts, but in Northern Virginia, communities that have used this, and have seen over my lifetime the use of this just creating very positive returns for the communities in question. And so for me, a big focus is, and in the places I'm referring to, was about driving decisions about taxes, and mainly generating revenues in a way that limits the tax burden on property tax for residents and creates an environment in which the ability to maximize revenues generated through commercial. And we've heard even earlier today from both Steve and Martha about local option tax growing, about the revenue on fire certification growing when we have businesses like Onologic and Beta. And we have in our plan for the city designated areas around the airport, Tech Park, and the question is, can we make decisions that can facilitate the development of those areas, and that see them grow in such a way that we can sort of predict the generation of revenues? Because if we look at the last budget, as I mentioned earlier, it passed by 2%. As far as I know, that's one of the lowest figures in recent years. So that definitely means that we're probably running into a threshold. I know when I was campaigning, that was definitely the issue of affordability kept coming up. So I see what you're proposing here, and I applaud the city and Jesse for looking on this as a tool on how do we make smart decisions that help us within our city plan, within our sort of objectives, grow those pockets in a way that perhaps historically, because I think to your point also, which is very good, is that when you start down a path and you do collect some of the data, you basically realize. I remember some person telling me that, the whole issue of local option tax is always going to be a small figure. yes, it's a small figure, but it is growing, and we're wondering, is it growing just back to pre-COVID, or is it a reflection of some of the decisions we made, or the city council and the city made previously that has allowed commerce to grow in South Burlington? And is there a way within our parameters to make it even grow more so, and definitely address the fatigue that is, I think, pretty widespread in the city on growing on property taxes, especially when it's compounded by the challenges on the school taxes that we have, limited control over. Again, efficiencies plays to that same issue, very much so. I fully agree with Andrew that, looking at comparison, just because it's not invented here doesn't mean it can't be something that we can borrow, they say. So I think that's a great idea. But I would also add to that, looking within our municipality. Are there similar efficiencies in terms of applying services across our different neighborhoods? If you're talking about cost of living, and is it cost of living per capita, sort of average for the entire municipality, or by neighborhoods and different? Because there's different socioeconomic sort of realities in South Burlington, which in Vermont is the second biggest city. And clearly, as I found walking around it, there are differences, and I think we're all trying to be very much sensitive to that. So I think getting that sort of refinement, at least from my perspective, will help us make sound policy decisions that will affect everyone. So I applaud this, and also I don't know if it's possible, but on the housing, and I guess maybe I'd welcome if you've had any experience on how to help us make policy decisions based on data that help, addressing what is clearly the big problem, not just in South Burlington, Vermont, but nationwide, is developing that missing middle housing. And not so much in a renter's context, the missing middle where you can, as a young professional, a young person, a young worker, or a young laborer, can aspire to buy something and start to building that equity as a step ladder that allows you to basically see a future here. Because that's clearly one of the challenges. So again, I applaud this initiative. I look forward to the ideas, and as I said earlier, I've seen this process work amazingly over a 30-year time period in places where I used to live.
Thank you.
So I spend all of my time at work thinking about this type of thing, but from a manufacturing perspective. Because we make things, and we like to know what we make, when we started making it, when we finished making it, what were the qualifications of the things that we made? Did they work correctly when we made it? When did they work? When did they not work, right? And you can imagine in any commercial manufacturing environment, like even a brewery, they want to know what time they started this temperature, what time they ended this temperature, how long did the brew process, did the fermentation process go on, how, all that data is really important to analyze, to go back and look at it and say, we had a successfully brewed batch of beer that was very popular because we sold this much, and I spend my day trying to gather large globs of data from disparate databases to put it together to be able to tell somebody something that they couldn't figure out before, right? So, but those are very transactional sources, right? Municipality has transactional data. I mean, Martha's a great example of it. Every financial ledger entry is transaction, and it's all about transactions. When did you issue the permit? How many bedrooms was it for? Where was it located? All that information is very readily parsable into something that can be pulled back out later. My question is, how much history should we backload in order to be able to compare today versus before, and then when we get into the future, compare to today? And that's a really interesting thing, because if you're starting to load data that you didn't have before, do you have any access to history? In a perfect world, right, there would be open source software for every municipality. It would be exactly the same, and every transaction that occurs goes into a log. It's got a timestamp, a department, a value, a location, how many hours was spent on that whole thing, right? So that you just go back and pull it out as you need. Like every baseball game, right? Every pitch goes into a log, right? And that's a pie in the sky wish. But so from a strategy point of view, I see your point where you have to know what you're looking for, because you can't have everything, but you can have some things. So this is a great discussion. I could think about this all night, but we can't.
If I'm tracking you correctly, I would say a couple things. One is certainly to your point, like a city isn't a manufacturing process, but there are so many processes within a city operation where changes to inputs can have sometimes exponential impacts on the outcomes, right? Which is exciting to think about, or for some people it's exciting to think about, maybe I should say. But just so I take that point in terms of the history. It is really hard to answer that independent of a clear goal in a specific context. I think it goes back to one of the first comments that someone made, Councilor Fitzgerald. I think just it could be a very overwhelming process. And so what I'm taking from this discussion is that from a council perspective, focusing on affordability in terms of tax policy, housing, and being able to map kind of what is true in the community and what does the community need. Questions around climate, questions around community engagement, those are areas where clear metrics could be quite helpful over time. And I've got to take that back. I can't commit to specific metrics on the fly, but that's something I would take back and help prioritize the data strategy that I'm developing here. In terms of the kind of specific history, so much will depend on the specific context of the metric that you're talking about, I think. And then sometimes situations change dramatically, pre-COVID, post-COVID. So it's hard to give you a clear answer on that particular question.
What's next?
You guys tell us. This is your.
Yeah.
Are there other? Brian, did you have another
Just
slide?
one question, last question. You gave us a very good timeline on how you'll develop this strategy, and that strategy will inform the position that will be hired to basically carry out this strategy. When is it realistic? And I'm also thinking, as you mentioned, as I mentioned, the budget cycle. I mean, when will this data be able to flow back? And are we talking about things that will help the council in this coming year? And I know it'll be incremental change, or is it more realistic to say, we're really talking not, this upcoming budget year, but, the subsequent budget year?
Some of that will be dependent on when the hire is possible, I suspect. But I don't know, Jesse, if you want to answer that first or if you want me to answer that.
I think that hiring question or hiring response is a good response. It is partially why we wanted to hear from you all tonight about how we can be strategic. I mean, there are data teams that are constantly employed to dig in and find more and course correct and fine tune. We will definitely not be at that stage by the time we develop the budget. But if there were a priority, or I think there is emerging a priority list of, 10 to 15 data points that would be helpful to you all to help start telling the story of affordability in our community, and some staffing comparison data that we could strategically start with through the budget process and then see where we take it. To me, that's what Steve and I have been trying to grapple with, is how do we start with something that's manageable and bite-sized for both the staff and the council to take and run with. So that's our hope in the next couple of months.
And I would just support everything that Jesse says and say, in addition to the kind of policy metrics that you see here, which are tied back to the municipal plan by and large, this is a list that I would update based on the feedback here. There's also a separate set of kind of operational phase 1 metrics for day-to-day management within the city to think about for those same reasons.
So would the job description include like the GIS skills plus database skills plus like ETL type skills?
That is our challenge. That is part of what we're trying to
creating chart skills, or, using data analysis, and that's what you're working towards?
Don't forget crystal ball.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is what we are trying to unpack, of where across these questions we're trying to answer, what we're trying to how we're trying to use data on an operational basis, and how we want you all, how to support you all to use operational data on a policy basis. What is the right skill set that we need to bring onto our team? Right now we have Paul and Tom and Dave and a number of others in the audience and on our team who have GIS skill sets and are using consultants to backfill that. But they also have full-time other jobs of things they're doing. So do we achieve that maintaining good quality data by just having a GIS person on staff to solely focus on that, but lose the opportunity of really digging into the operational, financial, linking the types of data together piece. How do we balance that between existing staff, consultants, and a new hire to maximize the value? And that's what Brian's helping us unpack. If you know the perfect GIS/data wizard, let me know.
I do think, to your point and Jesse's, that it's hard to find all of those skills in one individual. And so we're looking at possible different scenarios of how could you meet what the needs of the city are and have a successful hiring process.
So from my point of view, the feedback we've heard from you tonight is really useful. As Brian showed in this timeline, we have a few more weeks of this. So if you go back and are looking at documents that we're sharing or having conversations with the community and like, oh, I really missed this data point, feel free to share it with Brian or me or Steve or all three of us. You might want to ask if anybody has other questions or
Well, before I ask that, are we allowed to talk to you individually at all? And are you resident in City Hall while this is going on? Or are you remote? Or
I'm in and out of City Hall quite a bit, but not resident in City Hall. I'm happy to connect if that's useful to you. Okay. And I think really the key thing that is helpful to me is hearing where your priorities lie. Because if it wasn't housing, taxes, climate change, then I would really need to shift gears. It sounds like that and community engagement really are the areas of focus.
And I think on Brian's last slide that I clicked through is his contact information.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Very interesting.
Thanks, Brian. And I guess I would also be remiss if I didn't thank the department heads who are helping inform this process too. Brian spent a lot of time with Paul and Tom and Martha and Chief Burke and Steve, and really appreciate that they are integrating this into.
Before you vacate, let's just ask if the public has any comments or questions for you. Anybody in the public want to make a comment or question? They're all thinking very deeply right now about data, okay, and where it comes from and what it's used for and how to keep it around, what media it'll be stored on, what format it'll be stored in, how many times you have to like buy another piece of software to keep it alive.
We want to avoid that.
Oh, yeah, true.
Thank you,
All right,
Brian.
thank you very much. All right, moving on to item number 8, which is receive information on the water service area, sewer service area, and Act 47 zoning district concepts and alignment with Paul Connor from Planning and Zoning, who's the director, and Tom DePietro, Public Works Director. Thank
You want data, we got data.
You do have data? Are we going to see some GIS diagrams tonight?
You are going to see some
maps?
GIS maps. Yeah. So Paul Connor, Director of Planning and Zoning.
Tom DePietro, Director of Public Works.
So in your packet, we included a memo that described how the proposed water service area, proposed sewer service area, and zoning work that the Planning Commission is working on are intended to connect. So you met last month and got an overview of the water district. We talked a little bit about this subject, and Council really wanted some more information. So this evening, with your concurrence, I'm going to walk through the web map that we and our consultant put together to help show you how we got to the draft that's here, and what the foundational policy documents that yourselves and your predecessors have put in place that led us to this. So, without further ado, and with probably. Just a moment. Just need to get the right piece up. Come on. There's the web map. And share screen. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through some of what's in this web app. There's a lot of material in here, for those of you who've had a chance to look through it a little bit. There's a lot in there. There's a lot of ways to turn data on and off. So I'm going to sort of guide you through our thought process that's led to this work. I'm going to mostly lead through this, but feel free to interrupt with any questions or to jump in with Tom, who's an expert in all the technical components behind all this. So, brief background. Act 47 was passed last year, as you know. Act 47 sets a requirement that in areas served by water and sewer in all municipalities in the state of Vermont, there's a minimum density that is required. So wherever housing is allowed, if the area is served by water and sewer, the community must allow at least 5 homes per acre, and must allow buildings of up to 4 dwelling units in the building. There's some other things as well, but those are really the core things. The legislation defines what an area served by water and sewer is, and most specifically spends some time talking about some exceptions to the rule. So it doesn't really talk too much about what is served by water and sewer other than to call it municipal water, municipal sewer. And then it gives some caveats of saying where constrained by capacity limitations, policies, etc. And so a municipality, let's say, that had no sewer capacity would not necessarily be required to do that. And then the carve-outs are within areas that are otherwise served by water and sewer. There are some exceptions. Most of them don't apply in South Burlington, but let's say a line was run all the way through a rural area to serve a pre-existing mobile home park. That doesn't mean that that entire rural area has to remain served, just the mobile home park, for example, as an example. In South Burlington, as you likely know, we've had water and sewer ordinances for a long time, but our ordinances have really come at this from a public health perspective. They don't really define a maximum service area. It has not been used as a policy document in that way. It's been used in the policy document in terms of if a new house is being built and it's in an area that is otherwise has, say, a sewer line, that home must connect to the sewer line from a public health perspective. You tell me if I'm saying anything out of turn there, but that's the lens through which those ordinances were put together. Meanwhile, our zoning and our comprehensive plan have for a long time been addressing where is it appropriate there be medium scale development, medium low scale development, higher scale development, and conservation areas. And so there's a lot of guidance that exists from our existing policy documents about where's the city striving to see neighborhoods continue to evolve and be built, where's the city looking to see conservation take place. It's a little bit nuanced in our community, as it is in many communities, that conservation areas are not always 100% absolutely, just like in rural areas throughout the state. There may be towns where 1 home is allowed per 30 acres in a rural area to support farming. That doesn't necessarily mean that that whole area is intended to be 5 units an acre. It may be that the goal is agriculture in a given area. So, with that as my backdrop, we're talking about how we are proposing to align 3 policy documents to best serve the city so that we are both complying with Act 47, the law of it and the spirit of it, and also protecting those policy decisions, policy directions that the city has advanced around conservation, housing, things like that. So up on your screen here, I will stop talking about the about and just go straight to the map. This is the city's 2024 city plan future land use map. So at a very high level, this is our policy document. It is intentionally fuzzy, so as you zoom in, which this allows us to do, the boundaries are a little bit fuzzy, and that's on purpose because it is a plan, not a regulation. The yellow areas in this are at what we call lower scale neighborhoods, primarily residential areas. The orange represent medium scale, primarily residential areas. The red represent high scale mixed use areas. And when I say mixed use, I mean mix of residential, commercial, business, that kind of thing. The purple is a new category added this year that reflects largely business with business and industrial, with looking towards ancillary and support services, which may include overnight accommodations. It's brand new, so we haven't defined what that means, whether that's permanent housing or it's extended stay hotels, things like that, but it's been a lot of interest from the business community to explore how we can support them. The purple is essentially non-residential areas. Largest component of that is the airport. Sorry, blue is, excuse me, I meant to say, is the largest component is the airport, but it's also some of our industrial and business parks where the intent is to be principally or entirely non-residential. And then the last one is the green one, and that is the areas where it is very low intensity, low scale, principally conservation is the goal. And I'm going to talk about some of the zoning in a minute, but basically this comprises city-owned parks, permanently conserved land, areas where our zoning has for quite some time been our natural resource protection zoning, our habitat blocks, our river corridors, and our 100-year floodplains. So it's really the areas that the city has prioritized as being for largely conservation and or very limited other activities.
Paul, can I just ask you, so
Sure.
the what we see now is what actually exists on the ground now, or which is what we ostensibly aspire to?
This is what we aspire to. I would say that there is a close relationship, but not one-to-one relationship of what's on the ground. So it is in recognition of what's on the ground. We did an analysis leading into the into this city plan of land that is built upon, land that is unbuilt and either conserved or regulated to be conserved or for no development, and land that is unbuilt but is zoned and planned for essentially for development. That third category of it is unbuilt and intended and allowed to be built is only about 6% of our city. So while this is a aspirational map, at a very high level in terms of should it be planned to be neighborhoods, should it plan to be conservation areas, that's fairly reflective of what's on the ground. Of course, infill is a huge component of this. There is a tremendous opportunity, and this is outside of what we're talking about tonight, but Shelburne Road could have substantially more within what's there, and that's reflected in this map.
So in that sense, you could, just so I understood you correctly, 6% of land where it's not been developed is open for development. There X number is already developed and X number is conserved. I mean, if you're talking about a macro, just to align this sort of, this picture with sort of how each one of these categories fall into as a percentage.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'm going to say it's somewhere in the neighborhood of they're both in the mid-40s in terms of what is built upon to some extent, what is unbuilt and either conserved or regulated for limited or no development, and then the balance is the 6%. I can get you the exact numbers. So they're just not off the top of my head.
All right, thank you, Paul.
Okay, so this is our future land use policy. I'm going to layer onto it quickly where we have existing water service. So this is a little bit exaggerated in terms of its breadth. But these are the areas of the city, generally speaking, served by water and sewer. They've got a big buffer on them so that they are visible at this scale. They've got 500 feet around them. But you can see, and if I toggle just a little bit between these two, and I have to remember there's a delay in doing this, that this and this are pretty closely related. And you're going to see in a few minutes more. I'm going to show them directly over each other. But this is a snapshot of where we have water and sewer service. I'm going to zoom in a little bit to show you. This is the slightly harder to read version of this.
Sorry, we have exactly the same profile of water and sewer. Where there's sewer, there's water, or is that always
This
the
is
case?
where both exist.
Or where, okay. So
Right,
there's some
so-
places where there may be one or the other, but
For the most part, where there's one, there's the other. It's not 100%, but for the purpose of Act 47 and to simplify this a little bit, this map is where both exist. Anything that you want to add to that, Tom?
I'll just add, you'll notice some newer neighborhoods are not represented here. That's just because the data is not updated yet. So we typically don't update our water line data till we get record drawings. And so if you look close, you'll see a couple spots where that
Right.
exists on the map.
South Village Phase 2 and 3 don't show up in there, but we did account for it in our later planning work. We just in our initial one. So this one is a smaller buffer. It's a little bit harder to see the patterns out of it, but that's 200 feet from all the water and sewer lines. And you can see again that, and this will become more obvious in just a minute, but as I toggle this on, there's a close relationship between those two. I promise it'll be easier to see them in a second. The different municipalities, as they think about and look at how to tackle this question of Act 47, could come at it different ways. So a community that is a historically small village with a large countryside might come at it from saying, what's our village area? What's our planned area around it for future housing? And then might draw the water and sewer service map starting at 0 and building it out. Because of the extent of our water and sewer map and where it already exists, it seemed more fruitful for us to come at it from the opposite angle in South Burlington. Let's start with acknowledging that much of the city is served by water and sewer, and then let's identify those green areas from the prior map where there is planned long-term conservation and remove those from the planned sewer service area. So I realize that this is an odd conversation where we're talking about housing, and a lot of my discussion is where are we not providing service, but it's really based on the particulars of South Burlington where most of it is, and so it's an easier conversation to frame it as the city is fully served except these limited areas, rather than trying to build it from where might we want to start having it because it exists in so much of our city. All right, I'm going to shift gears to take off the exact sites, and I'm going to start to show the planned service areas and how we came to that. So if you open up the web app, this is the first thing that appears. Our city is vertical, but all computer screens are horizontal. So if you need me to go up or down, please let me know. I'm sort of picking the middle of the city. This is the draft map for you all to consider that reflects the planned water and the planned sewer service area. They are nearly identical, and Tom will talk about the one difference between them. But they are nearly identical and essentially encompass all of the areas that in our future land use map are identified as areas that either are existing or planned areas of neighborhoods and development. And they exclude the areas that I just described of habitat blocks, river corridors, 100-year floodplains, and the Natural Resource Protection Zoning District, which are our policy guidance that we've received for not having development. Also our parks districts. This is where it becomes a little bit easier for me to show you toggling on and off. You'll see here that there's a pretty close match to this is the future land use map underneath it. And if I take the future land use map off, the green areas is what disappears. So that's really where the alignment takes place. In our memo, we described that there are certain specific circumstances that we can go into and drill into any one of them, where there's some proposed very minor adjustments either to our zoning or to the water and sewer map or both to make sure that we are consistent with frankly takings law and property rights. And so I don't want to do too deep of a dive into this, but in our zoning, there are a small number of parcels where the entirety or overwhelming majority of the parcel is in a habitat block. Within the zoning, what we say today is that the property owner has the right, as they go in front of the development review board, to have up to 30% of that, or 30% of that property removed from the habitat block during the development review process so that they can build on that 30%. And that is to make sure that their property rights of making economic value of their property can be achieved. Our reading of Act 47, and to best advance the interests of the city of both conservation and allowing for development, was to, rather than have that be a floating area on these handful of properties, specifically identify where they are, and then specifically identify which 30% can be built on. A reading of Act 47 might suggest that if you allow some portion of the property to be built on, and the applicant property owner gets to choose, that maybe all of it needs to allow for it, which could be counter to the objectives of the habitat block. So as we look in here, if you were to do a comparison of our habitat blocks as they exist today and what's proposed, there is a small difference. And there's data layers in here showing which are those specific parcels that were more than 70% covered, which led to our policy recommendations. I think I'm going to pause there for a minute. We do have also draft zoning in here. I'll note that the Planning Commission has been working on the updates to the zoning. They have been working essentially in parallel to your process. They have not reviewed the draft water and draft sewer maps specifically, but they have been looking at the zoning component of this. They haven't looked at the water and sewer maps because water ordinance and sewer ordinances are the council's authority and responsibility unless otherwise determined, whereas the zoning is the Planning Commission's to review and then provide to you. Staff sees these as well aligned, and we'll certainly share this with the Commission. And this is, I think, consistent with where they've been with their work. And I think I will stop at that. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between the water service and sewer service areas?
Sure. Yep. So, as Paul just described in detail there, why there's certain areas that are cut out of the map, not within the service area. There is one additional area on the water side for the drinking water. And so we are required to provide a minimum 35 PSI to homes. And with the water in our tanks over a certain elevation, we can't do that. And so you will see those areas carved out here. It's the orange is underneath the purple. So, well, it's purple now. But that's the water service area, and the orange is the sewer service area. So those are the areas that are above that elevation that we can serve the minimum pressure.
And there are a few areas over 430 feet that already have neighborhoods in them. Those were left in as being served, both because we don't want to make anybody nervous that their water would be turned off, but also from a realistic, practical, if somebody were to put an accessory dwelling unit on the same on the same property, they have a right to do that. From a zoning perspective, it would be very peculiar to say, oh, but you can't put that in, even though that's a little bit challenging from a water service. And we have mapping to show where those areas are. But
Do those areas have low pressure or lower?
These are primarily areas that historically the city approved with private booster pump stations.
Private.
And so that's how they've achieved the necessary minimum water pressure, so they continue to maintain those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would they be able to, I remember reading in here something that if a single family home has that right, then you can also have a duplex. In theory, could that person take their home and a developer or someone take their home and say, let's turn this into a duplex or to a 4-unit house? Or they would be, because it requires these pressure boosters, would be not allowed to sort of redefine the use of where their housing is?
So they're served at the minimum pressure, so they could still do that.
Still do it.
So I think that this map where the oranges are essentially unbuilt areas, as opposed to the built. And it doesn't mean that housing cannot exist in these areas if the zoning allows for it, but it would not be served by the water service.
Sure.
Paul, thank you for the clarification sort of on what's planning commission, what's council. I still, we are expecting an update from the planning commission in the June timeframe, I think, on the impact of the Home Act on LDRs and all the discussion that's gone on with that. I continue to struggle to understand, are the ordinance updates getting out ahead of the reconciliation that the Planning Commission will have around alignment and compliance with Act 47? And I guess the other question I have is, at the end of the day, the intent was the goal of increasing housing supply and reducing barriers to entry. So I guess what I haven't heard within the ordinances is, how does that happen? With the exception of, you made a comment about it doesn't say that housing couldn't exist, but it would be a separate or privately managed. But I guess I'm trying to get the umbrella view of,
Sure.
Are these ordinance updates getting out ahead of the Planning Commission review of the
So
impact?
let me take your second question first and then your first question second. Your second question was the purpose of the legislation is to support housing. The Planning Commission in their work has a number of tools that they are proposing that are both meeting the requirements of Act 47 to make sure that, for example, some of our zoning districts that are served by water and sewer today allow fewer than 5 units an acre. So they're making sure that they are increasing to the minimums. Without going too much into that discussion, they're also not in acknowledging what our city plan is striving for in terms of investment of thriving neighborhoods, acknowledging the housing needs, meeting our climate goals. I would say that the Commission's work has not been about meeting the bare minimums of the statute, but rather what is the intent behind the statute? How does that align with our city goals? And so in many ways, the work that they're doing is beyond the minimums outlined in state statute, while at the same time, and this is why I was talking about the areas that are in green in the future land use map, while at the same time holding the city's values of conserving land that has been identified for conservation. So the city plan is very clear in its objectives of support additional housing, support thriving neighborhoods, support affordability, and conserve land. And so that's holding this. So that's their work that they're coming forward with you. I didn't want to make a 5-page memo, a 12-page memo by going into all that detail, but that is absolutely their mission in what they're doing. In terms of timing, as I said, the zoning work that they've been doing aligns the zoning districts very closely to what you're seeing up here. And so from staff's perspective, and our city attorney Colin can weigh in on this as well, we're not seeing that the council has to hold on that work until advancing this work here, because they are all intended to be aligned. I think my perspective for you all would be, if the council is comfortable, or when the council is comfortable with what you're seeing in the purple and the orange here, and you believe that that is well aligned with the city's goals, that if you're generally satisfied, or you want to review and then will become satisfied, that's aligned already with the commission's work. And so there's not a need to hold for that. That said, if council is looking at this and says, this is 90 degrees from where we are intending to be, then I would say it would be important for council to spend some time tonight and or at a future meeting to tell us, staff and ultimately the commission, if we're off by 90 degrees on this whole thing, because that would be important for making sure that we're realigned. But right now, if council is ultimately pretty comfortable with this, then there already is alignment.
And the other question I had, and again, I don't have that sentiment at all. I'm really just sort of looking at the bigger picture and trying to understand the sequencing of the work. Will there be any kind of visual at the end of all of this work that sort of says, here's the impact on South Burlington of Act 47?
There will be a lot of visuals showing how the neighborhoods, how the zoning changes will what the effect of the zoning changes is. The Planning Commission has talked about that. I'm not sure if you have one specifically that you're thinking of.
No, I guess I'm looking for, I mean, at the end of the day, it's sort of and it's not even a specific goal, it's the opportunity for potential, I guess. Because at the end, at the end of the day, the legislation was intended around reducing barrier and increasing, and it's not a saying that will be the outcome, but with these overlays, that would be of interest to me to sort of see where the potential either still exists or was enhanced by the work that's been done to align all the ordinances and the ultimately the Planning Commission recommendations too.
That's good feedback. Thank you. I think that specifically to the water and the sewer maps, I expect that the result will be that what is shown here with the adjustment that Tom spoke about of areas over 430 feet of elevation is capturing our current policy on the zoning side. So it in and of itself doesn't change very much. However, the zoning does enable additional options, which that's good feedback on how to make sure that the council and the public are well informed as to what is proposed, and then what is adopted ultimately.
So
Thank you.
The Act 47, there are some purple areas there that are served, and they are currently not developed. They're privately owned. They could be developed, but the density of housing in those areas could be higher than was allowed, let's say, 2 years ago, right?
Yes. So, for example, we have some areas that might have been 2 units an acre in the area, in the Songbird area, for example, or 3 units an acre along Bartlett Bay Road in that area, and then a handful of places that were 1 unit an acre, like along Spear Street. Mm-hmm. Those areas are largely or entirely served by water and sewer, and so the minimum now does state that those are 5 units an acre.
So they could potentially attain those densities if they were to be developed.
If they were to be developed, or really in many cases redeveloped or infilled.
Redeveloped,
and
right.
I think one of the things that the Commission's had a lot of discussion from their end is many of these areas are built areas, and so while there are certainly effects and potential effects, it's going to be much more at an incremental scale of a property owner who maybe owns the house is deciding, oh, maybe I'd like to turn this into a duplex, or maybe there's room in the back for an additional one, which is a very different form of development that we've historically seen in the city, where much of what we've seen has been, it was a greenfield and now it's proposed to be built.
Right. And the 6% you were talking about, how would that change this service map? Would it like bring small little,
Right. Well, they are areas that have been zoned for development. They just happen to be unbuilt today. So largely that is land that is either in Technology Park or associated off Tilley Drive or Kimball Avenue or Heinsberg Road, sort of immediately south of the interstate. Those are areas that the zoning for a long time has allowed for development on portions of that property. but where it has not taken place. So that's really where most of that 6%. There's a handful of others off Shelburne Road, and
Okay.
but not many.
What about the conservation areas where you would allow 30%? Is there a map for that yet, or?
You're speaking about the areas where the habitat blocks are,
yeah.
or are you speaking about the conservation PUDs? Because they're
PUDs.
slightly different tools.
PUDs.
Okay. So bear with me, this gets a little technical.
Sure.
We're
here for tonight.
Right. Well, in some parts of the city, the city's current regulations allow for or require what we call a conservation PUD. So on parcels of more than 4 acres in size, and I'll show you where these are in a minute, on parcels of more than 4 acres in size, if it's going to be built upon, then the property owner must conserve 70% of that property and may build on up to 30%. So if you had a 10-acre parcel in this area and you were a conservation plan unit development, you would conserve 7 and build on 3. In several parts of the city, that's an option, and since it's an option, we didn't spend too much time from the purpose of Act 47 because they have other options as well, and there's reasons why somebody might choose to do it. There are a handful of areas where they are presently mandatory, and that is in the southeastern part of the city. And just bear with me while this loads. Hopefully these little flags pop up. Come on. The computer's doing a lot of work right now, so it's just got to think about it for a minute.
Something's happening.
Just a second, a lot of things just turned on at once.
Look at the colors.
Okay, come on. There they are. Okay. These green parcels, and I'm going to turn on the parcels so you can see these two. These green parcels, or the parcels that have the little green flags in them, are the parcels in the city where currently under our regulations it is mandatory to have a conservation PUD if you're going to build. So they are parcels in the southeast quadrant zoning district that include at least 4 acres of land that are in a development portion of the zoning district, i.e., not the natural resource protection sub-district. There's about 15 of them or so, and you'll see they're sort of scattered in a variety of places, but they're all in the southeast quadrant. Planning Commission's had a fair amount of
What's the between the red mark and the green mark?
The red are areas of the southeast quadrant where they are where they're an option. So they're not mandatory. They could also be a traditional neighborhood PUD. We're reusing an existing data set, so I just didn't change that entire.
And the one orange dot?
I think the one orange dot is supposed to be a red dot, but it has other colors over it and under it. So these 15-ish parcels, currently, as I said, it is mandatory that if they develop on it, except for a one-time little carve-out that they can do, must conserve 70% of the land. We walked through these with the Planning Commission, and what we found is to be consistent with and to comply with Act 47, we really needed to look at these on a case-by-case basis. And so the 70% tool is a pretty blunt instrument that says, regardless of context, regardless of situation, 70% must be conserved, 30% can be built on. The spirit and intent and letter of Act 47 is if an area is served by water and sewer and it is not otherwise constrained, it's supposed to allow 5 units an acre. And so looking at this, I'm going to zoom in on one parcel here. I'm going to use this one as an example here. So right here is about a 5-acre parcel off Spear Street. There's a single family home on it today. There is a river corridor at the very back of the property. You see that little purple line? That's a river corridor that extends about 150 feet, maybe to about here. That is a constraint on development regardless. All around this property, north of it, south of it, and soon to be east of it with the Spear Meadows neighborhood is development. Staff's recommendation and the commission's working action is that the blunt tool of a 70% conservation be removed and instead look to the regulations that we have about habitat blocks, river corridors, wetlands, steep slopes, and floodplains, and use those as the determinant about where it is mandatory to have conservation. And so on a property like this, really where it's surrounded by water and sewer and where there's no constraints that have been identified formally by the city, either in our city plan or in our regulations, most of that land would be developable. Meanwhile, looking at the context, I'm going to give 2 other examples, if you'll bear with me, Councilor Barrett. Looking at a parcel like these ones over here, this is a high point in the city. There is natural resources in several areas around it, natural resource protection districts. It would make more logical sense in some of the examples like this one and a couple of others that I can point to extend the natural resource protection district. It's already contiguous to identified natural resources. Another one is up in this area here. To extend the natural resource protection district by a small amount, to acknowledge that there was a purpose behind the 70%, and to connect it to an existing policy where there was a corridor. A third example, and I can go into a little more detail if you would like, or we can have the commission present that to you when it gets to it about what those specific cases are.
Just on that base, you said attach 70% to an existing corridor, leaving the other 30% for development, or
well, I was not necessarily going with the hard numbers of 70% anymore, and instead looking to where are there natural barriers or transitions by natural resources. And so if it made sense that the steep slope started at a certain point, then maybe to align itself with that. The third case that I wanted to speak to are areas where practically it doesn't really make sense to have the 70% just written in stone. So these are homes that are right off Dorset Heights. They are each about 10 acres in size. Each of these parcels is about 50% already in a conservation zone. That's the yellow, the Natural Resource Protection District, and 50% in a development district. So it's not that far off from 70-30, but it is 50-50. In each of these cases, the existing house is right here. They are right at or very close to the back of these properties. And so to bring it to 70% conservation would essentially mean put the existing house into a conservation, which really doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of, it's meeting mathematically an answer, but it's not really recognizing what's on the ground. Anecdotally, these particular properties also each have cross covenants to one another that are restricting development. That is not city's responsibility, but it is something we're aware of. In total, I think I put it in the memo, we looked at what is the net effect, Tim, of this switching from 70% as a blunt instrument to looking sort of site by site and how many acres are involved. And I believe in my memo, I described that it was a net of, now I'm going to have forgotten the numbers. One of them is 35 and one of them is 64 acres. So using the eliminating some of these areas that I described in that first example of it didn't really logically match Act 47 to require a blanket 70%, or this example, or even some of the other ones. Our initial estimate is that that meant that total areas planned for conservation decreases by 34 acres on the total of 10,600 in the city. At the same time, there's some areas where our zoning is could be caught up to current practices, including the recent conservation of the Eau Claire properties, the work that has taken place to include some parkland in the city. That switches it to a net of 56, actually more planned for conservation, acknowledging that that's already done and we're just catching up the zoning to it. So the message that staff has left, and of course this is a decision for the commission and for you to make, is that given what Act 47 is asking of and trying to align it with our city policies, to be somewhere in the 0.3 to 0.5 shift, 0.3 to 0.5% of all of our land area shift from one designation to another means that we've been doing a lot of work that is really aligned with where the state has been trying to do, and these are some minor adjustments to be made to meet it. So that's our overall conclusion, but that's staff's view. This is for the commission and you all to ultimately decide if you agree and want to shift.
Is that going to be problematic to codify those types of subjective decisions you would make on a parcel by parcel basis?
So for the habitat blocks, we have mapped out where they are, and we that's the recommendation zoning map, just like any other zoning map. For the conservation PUDs, it essentially removes the requirement for 70% in a conservation PUD, and it goes straight to the what is the zoning district or what are the resources on the property. So it's largely already mapped and already in place with some very minor adjustments to the NRP Natural Resource Protection District, which are shown and can be made clear to everybody what those proposals are. So no, I don't think that's a difficult additional mapping.
Thanks.
Along the same lines, because I in reading your memo, and thanks so much for putting all the details in there, you used the term a defensible way, which I thought was sort of an interesting term. And it goes back to, I guess, what Tim was saying about to codify this. I assume the intent and the spirit of the law was to basically create a net positive effect for housing and bear all throughout Vermont. So, and I was wondering if you could just sort of, what are the challenges going forward? Defensible way, defense against what is a liability, a lawsuit,
Sure.
A developer says your rules, I don't argue, and it's up to the
So
court to decide.
I'll start this and then I may hand it over to
Sure.
our city attorney on the word defensible. I'll start by saying while mapping out the water and sewer service areas is a component of Act 47, in our community, and I think looking at our future land use map and the resulting here, this is really already the mapping is just to make sure that the areas that we've identified for conservation have been captured as such. The real work in Act 47 to increase housing is within all those majority of the land area that is planned for and is existing neighborhoods. And there's a tremendous opportunity for increasing housing opportunities in those areas. So I don't think that there's a conflict there. From defensibility, I'm going to hand this off to Colin in a second, but when we use the term, what we mean is this legislation is untested. It has just passed. No community there's not been a legal challenge under it. And so as we have been exploring it, we've been looking at, there's all sorts of ways that a municipality could implement Act 47, could look at how to adjust habitat blocks or water and sewer service areas. Many communities are doing it differently. We were looking at it from the lens of how can we best reflect the city's policy in a way that existing policy and maybe make changes to our zoning or add a water and sewer service area to both meet the act and best align ourselves with our existing comprehensive plan. And so, there's a continuum of risk that can be assessed, and we took the perspective of let's make sure that we are buffering ourselves as best we can with the tools, all the tools available to us.
Or you pass it to the man who will have to manage the risk if it ever comes to that. Is I use the phrase sometimes. Land has been excluded, is excluded because of the policy guidelines they're referring to that were driven by the city, the habitats, etc., or excluded because there is no sewage or water there and it lends itself to the exclusion?
It's in most cases it's both. So it as I described, we started with the entire city, and then we removed those areas planned for conservation, which don't generally have existing water and sewer, and in the very small handful of cases where there was sewer serving or water and sewer serving one of these areas, and it's really single digit properties, those ones are proposed to be shown as served by water and sewer. But that's one place where, I think we can be proud and happy that in our community we don't have a confusion of an area served by water and sewer that is also planned for conservation. The only exception to that is that there are a handful of places in the city where there's a transmission line that goes through an area, but there's not been any connections to it. It was really just bringing a line through an area, and often that includes wetlands or parks or things like that. Does that answer your question? Please.
Yeah, but I can hear that a certain lawyer is going to have a little fine line to walk because there is, it sounds like this little area.
Well, and in those areas, we're proposing to be clean by showing them as being served by water and sewer and not having them in a conservation zone. But they're really a handful of properties where they've identified that, and we can show that to you, or we can do a follow-up for you.
And the last thing, excuse me, is back to a little bit with what Elizabeth was saying. It's sort of like a before and after. Is it possible to do a simplified map that shows, this is the way it's now, and in one map, these are sort of the changes? I just I think for myself, and I think for everyone visually, it's okay, it's the spirit, the law. We've looked at it. It's it's not exactly the same as it was. There were some changes, but because of, as you said, to a certain degree, a certain reality that the conserved land does not serve whatever, it just makes it, I think, simpler. Because I think at the end of the day, if I support it or encourage people to support it, whenever that decision is made, you got to have a certain level of confidence that we will not be calling on Colin to basically try to not have your time eaten up with trying to explain why things, were a little bit different than perhaps some might perceive.
Mike, all those purple areas that are served, right, under Act 47 have to have this new maximum density. So anything that's built that could be torn down and rebuilt can have that density. Anything that isn't built but could be built could have that density. So that's what we're really talking about, is what areas are served by both systems that would then meet the criteria that are outlined in the Act.
So those places always could have been built. There was nothing that we have done.
Right, but there was a lower maximum on the density depending upon
and that's what
what
I'm
the
just
zoning
trying
area
to
was.
be saying. To you, it's obvious you've been doing this for
No, I'm just
for
trying
5
to
years.
point out
so
to you
what I'm saying
what
is
the benefits are to the Act, to all the purple
I
areas.
agree, but for me, I'm just saying it would be easier, I think, in general, to the public myself, if it was somehow visually easier to
Sure,
somehow
and
see.
we do have that information about, for example, where in the transition, in the transferal from the habitat block, where let's say it covers 100% of the property, being the choice of the person, where it's 100% visually, but in fact 30% could be built on, to showing where that 30% is. We have both of those layers, and it would not be a big lift to pull those out very specifically and say where are those changes. And same thing in the very small handful of cases where the Natural Resource Protection District is proposed to be moved for one of the reasons we talked about, either adding or removing, to show those just popping right off the screen.
But in those cases, you're talking about 0.3% of the total acre.
Right.
So just keep that in mind from a scale perspective. You're talking about 0.3%. it hardly even is a dot.
But that itself
Right.
shows that a message, that argument that something we're already aligned, there isn't no need to change it, and this is the fact. We've done the due diligence, we've scrubbed it, and this is what we found.
That's fine, but it's the purple area that's more important because you get more housing out of that. If you're talking about housing, it's the purple area.
I'm just talking about I'm talking more from the legal perspective is as we go forward. And have we met the act? The due diligence is done. Great. We've shown that we've done the due diligence, and this is the finding of the due diligence.
I think reality is I don't have much to add to the conversation at this point. If you have direct questions, I can answer them. I think, defensible is a broad word. It's defensible in terms of explaining it to our fellow residents. It's reducing legal liability. It's complying with the act in general. There's a lot of different ways to explain it. And I think that's what Paul is going for here by saying defensible.
Thank you. So we're at 8:45 and we've beat this a little bit.
Oh, I haven't gone yet.
How much time do you need?
Some time. Thank you.
Because they have another presentation after this.
So, Paul, I know you mentioned a couple of things. One, that the NRP had to be adjusted a bit. Presumably, the Planning Commission has done that. Is that done and now reflected in this water sewer service map, or is that to come?
That is, the Planning Commission is completing their work. Done would imply that it's in your hands. So I would say they have reviewed it. They have been looking at cuts of it. They will be finalizing it in the next month.
But presumably that then has to feed into this, right? Because that may then affect these boundaries.
Right.
Okay. So this is not necessarily the final map from that perspective.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Because they have a public process that they need to go through. They have been reviewing this, but it is possible that they might recommend a change.
Same vein, because I'm proposed to personally move forward. Is there feedback? Or?
That was me.
I'm prepared to kind of move forward with this as it is, because I know the importance of the changes that we need to get into the water and sewer ordinance. But in terms of the map itself, my perspective is that this is so closely tied to what the Planning Commission does that they should also review the map, and we should possibly at a future time, if warranted, consider a revised map if that's what they propose. So one of the things I was thinking about is NRP, but when I look at this map, I also note that like the Hort Farm, the Wheelock Farm, agricultural areas, some of the agricultural areas south of Spear. I know the cemetery, City Center Park, Farrell, Szymanski, Hubbard, all kinds of areas that I would have thought, in my mind, are served by water and sewer in this map. And I understand why you did that. You and I have had that conversation, but I wouldn't mind personally the Planning Commission looking at that and seeing if that makes sense, or whether or not we should be further adjusting this water and sewer map to reflect those other conditions.
So a couple of quick notes on that, and certainly that's council's prerogative to do as you choose. One thing of importance specific to Act 47, Act 47 is only about housing. And so whether the city chooses to or not include industrial areas or areas that are institutional, which is our zoning district for UVM, is from the narrow perspective of Act 47 it neither advances it nor doesn't advance it. Now there may be good policy reasons for you to have that discussion, and I'm in no way discounting that. That's absolutely your prerogative and maybe important policy discussions. It is not specifically a requirement of Act 47. The council is, to your note, more than welcome to, if you choose to advance this map or a different map, to go back and make adjustments at a later date. I would probably discourage long-term from doing parcel by parcel adjustments to it, because that's the purpose of having an ordinance. But if you have a thing of we would like to evaluate a subject area further, there's, that's certainly, at least in my view, and city attorney can weigh in on that as well. That's a prerogative and a reasonable planning purpose.
Yeah, so again, I'd like to advance this now, but send the map because the map is so closely tied to what the planning commission does to allow them an opportunity to look at the map.
Right, and we've provided them the same web app and let them know about this evening taking place, and certainly we can
Right, but my
highlight it on an
understanding is they
agenda.
haven't yet actually looked at the map from a.
Correct.
It's not been on their agenda.
Right. And you can certainly have them look at it informally. If you want them to formally look at it, I would recommend that should be a council action because ordinances are the prerogative of council unless provided to somebody else. So just making sure that everybody is following what they're supposed to do. But informally, certainly, we try to share all this information with them and make them aware.
Elizabeth, any comments?
No.
All right. I think this is a good map, and I support it as well. Having the water and sewer service area maps conclusive makes perfect sense and aligns with the act. So, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
And going on to item 9, which is hold a first reading of a drinking water ordinance update and possibly set a public hearing on July 15th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Tom DePietro, Public Works Director, and Dave Wheeler, Water Resources Engineer. Come on down.
Good evening, everybody. Yes. Just pull up our presentation here, which Dave will walk you through.
What is going on?
Am I sharing? Oops. Okay. So introductions, Tom DePietro, Director of Public Works.
Dave Wheeler, Water Resources Engineer. All right.
Sorry, Dave, this is acting funny.
Yeah, it's got that auto advance thing in the settings.
Go. Thank you.
All right. Any questions?
All right.
Um,
A PDF of this, Dave?
yeah, I sent it.
If you would, please. I didn't realize it was going to do that.
All right. Well, yeah, we are back again. So hopefully you've had more time to read through some 80 pages of the red line markup ordinance. All right, yeah, so just, big picture overview of the drinking water ordinance for the city. It was first established in 1978, and then it was updated one time in 2002, so it has been quite a while. So a large part of updating the ordinance is to include the water service area map. But additionally, we've been tracking changes over years. There are various tweaks to language, clarifications, to resolve things that have come up, technical updates, technology has improved, just general modernization of the ordinance. And then we'll go over a few of the more significant changes, some of which you've already heard.
I'm going to jump in, just if anybody wanted that detailed information, kind of for those listening at home, perhaps. It was April 1st as we were here. We give a very almost line by line review of this. So, like Dave said, he's just going to hit the highlights tonight, the big changes.
Did anything change from April 1? No.
Nope.
Okay.
Yeah, same ordinance. Yep. So the water service area, policy on booster pumps, updating a policy on water meters, establishing a city center service area, and then a revised fee structure. All right, so you've all heard about the water service area. If there are any follow-up questions at this point in time, please ask Paul. So essentially, building within the area and not building outside of that area.
Well, just to clarify that as well, so you can still potentially build outside that area, you just wouldn't be required to hook to the city's water system, right? So you could still have a private well. We're not restricting that. That's state regulation.
we're also including a policy on booster pumps. So Tom had mentioned during the previous presentation, so the Vermont water supply rule requires that the minimum working pressure in the distribution system should be 35 psi. So we're preventing the scenario where booster pumps are used to achieve that 35 psi at higher elevations. Part of the reasoning behind that had to do with requiring backup generators for those. So in an emergency situation, we don't want folks to be without water. So there's now a section that just prohibits booster pumps unless you have a written approval from Vermont DEC.
Alternative is to drill your own well.
Correct.
Yep.
Vermont DEC, just help me out.
Department of Environmental Conservation. And then additionally, we have an updated policy on water meters. So we've been moving to remote radio read water meters versus having, manual readings. So that is one of the more significant updates. We've already gone through the process of updating the majority of the water meters to the remote readers. We've added a fee for those folks who have not made the transition to try and encourage them over and then cover the cost for that manual labor. We've clarified that the cost of installing a meter is paid by the property owner, but then the city takes over ownership of that meter thereafter. General technical requirements for the size of the water meter. And then we've added language for temporary meters during construction.
If a meter fails at some point in the future, does the city replace that at the city's cost?
I believe so.
And when the private individual replaces it, they pay for it. Is there general cost or really varies so much based on the size of the unit?
The different costs of the meters vary based on the size of the meter.
Is there a range from?
There is. I could pull it up.
No, I was just curious how much of a cost it was per person.
Then we establish a city center service area, and this is necessary to establish the new town center designation. And so we've established a reserve capacity of 250,000 gallons per day set aside for that service area.
That includes the U-Mall, right?
Correct.
I have a question. In the meeting of the City Center Collaborative, they came up that there was a possibility that we'd be moving towards a downtown designation because it provides additional grants and allows actually then South Burlington to have more than one urban center. Would that affect would that require in the future additional reserve capacity, or one's not tied to the other? Just wondering.
Yeah, we'll let Paul speak to that.
Hi, folks. Paul Connor, Planning and Zoning Director. So currently we have what's called a new town center designation that requires that we have capacity shown in this area. We reserve 50,000 gallons in, or 150,000 gallons in the wastewater, in the sewer ordinance, and 50,000 gallons in the water ordinance today. So there's proposed to be substantially more set aside, which is both recognizing that we need to set aside more for this area and also anticipating future designation programs that we may move towards a downtown. Also, there's a lot happening in the legislature that is re-envisioning entirely how they support areas of concentrated compact development, and this positions ourselves from these ordinances to be well suited to whatever the outcome of that is.
Great, thanks. That's a great answer. Thank you.
In terms of modernization, we had just outdated fees, civil penalties. So we've just increased those values to match and be consistent with other ordinances in the city. And then next slide. Okay. One of the bigger items in terms of the fees is updating our user fee. So there's now a base rate plus usage fee, but the base rate will start at $0. So it's not a policy change currently. It's just giving you a tool. If you want to revisit that in the future, you can have a discussion about setting a base rate. This just establishes that in the ordinance, and then you can adjust that without reopening the ordinance again. And then additionally, there's a minimum capacity or minimum use of 1,000 cubic feet per billing cycle, and we allow you to change that to a lower amount because right now 41% of customers are below that 1,000 cubic feet. So you could lower that down.
Andrew and Tim, you guys had a good question, I recall, about apartment and how to build. Is that ever, I didn't hear if that was ever answered.
Is the base rate per meter defined as per meter, or is as we define it?
So again, this doesn't change anything with billing. I guess I wanted to start there. This just allows that conversation that folks want to happen, because right now it's kind of hardwired or hard written into the ordinance that the base rate shall be based on 1,000 cubic feet. So this gives you all the opportunity to revisit that topic and really get into the weeds on it, which I think is what that topic's going to need before we make a decision on that. And so it can be 500, it could be 1,500, it could be whatever it might be, and we could capture some of the costs of providing water to the city within that base rate instead of just in the fee by volume. So,
I'm sorry, Tom, I thought those are two different concepts, the minimum usage and the base rate.
so it's,
I thought those are different concepts.
they are, yeah, but the way they're tied
Base
together.
rate is defined, is it per meter or is it per something else?
It'd be per account.
Yes,
Correct.
per account,
So it's so basically per meter.
per meter, yep.
So will the ordinance allow us to have the conversation about the 4-inch, service line going to a 60 apartment building? And
And-
how we could restructure that billing account?
Yeah, and so it does. It's broad, and we can take a look at it specifically if folks wanted to do that now. But it's intended to allow us to be able to establish that base rate by resolution later, and it doesn't tie us into one method of doing that because there's a variety of methods we could use
Okay.
to make a base rate that we felt was appropriate.
Because we're going to have that conversation someday, and I want to be able to have the ordinance be able to, convert to that. So,
And I think in our fee schedule, there are currently other subcategories like commercial versus residential that aren't specified in the ordinance but established in that fee schedule. So if you were to break that down by different categories, you could do it that way. Presumably.
because we're talking about residential buildings that are served by a single meter, and we don't know if they're being billed equivalently to single-family homes by usage. So that's what we're worried about. So we want to look at that very closely in the future to make sure that they're paying their fair share.
Tim, I think we need some data on that.
No, we do, but we haven't even gotten to the point where we can have the conversation yet, so, yeah.
So
Have we lost the presentation?
I'm not sure what's happening here. It's advancing on my slides.
I see it on your
It
screen.
is the slide, you all have the slide deck in your packet as well.
well, that was, I think, the meatiest slide. There's one more slide about next steps and then question slide. So if you want to just talk about next steps here, those are the big categories. So, yeah.
Yeah, so for next steps, this could count as the first reading tonight. We'd be looking for any feedback or for you all to make a motion to hold a second hearing, a second reading and public hearing if you desire.
I would entertain that motion.
Yes, so I'll move to hold a first reading of the drinking water ordinance. And possibly set a public hearing for July 15th, 2024 at 7 p.m.
Are you saying that we're absolutely going to set the date as July 15th?
And set a public hearing, yes, and set that date at July 15th, 2024 at 7 p.m.
Thank you.
I second that very specific.
So we have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I would like, as Paul kind of alluded, in connection with that, to ask the planning commission on a separate track to formally look at the map for us to possibly consider, and I know it would have to be adjusted in any event for NRP, but to possibly consider other changes, for instance, excluding some of the agricultural areas, some of the parkland, the cemetery, Farrell Park, other places from water and sewer.
Okay. You ready for the vote? All those in favor say aye. Aye?
Aye.
Can I clarify?
Sorry, what, do you just do a combined vote to set the public hearing and to send the map to the planning commission?
Well, hold on, he just had a recommendation. It has nothing really to do with,
I didn't know if that was an
Oh,
amendment.
okay.
yeah.
of
Yeah,
the-
well-
You're just making a recommendation.
Right. That's
Well,
what
I guess,
You recommended that before as well.
well, I mean, well, then maybe it's a question of process. I'd like to formally ask us to vote on that, and
I
is
don't know
that
if we
part
have
of
to
this?
vote on that.
Oh, okay.
I think
Yes,
it-
so I would recommend you need to, if you want to do that, you take two different votes,
Okay.
and Paul, jump in here. Set this motion to do the second reading and hold the public hearing, vote on that. Second motion, send the map to the planning
Okay.
commission for their review.
So the first motion was simply
just-
about the second first reading.
Just by sending the map, does that change the, I mean, because of the question that came up earlier about the sequencing, and I think both Elizabeth and Andrew were sort of suggesting the sequencing, perhaps having the planning commission. I mean, is this somehow
I'll
tied
tell
to
you,
that?
I mean,
or-
my perspective would be that this is important to get the changes, the wording change the ordinance in to, for instance, make it no longer mandatory to hook up in areas where we don't want. So I think it's important. And I guess in my mind, tweaking the map further could happen at a, in a separate timeline. That's my own perspective, anyways, to share.
My understanding of that direction to the planning commission would be separate from the current work that they are doing to complete Act 47 in the timeline of the next month or so, following that to do this review that you're recommending.
Yes.
And Colin looks like he really wants to say something. I think if you're going to I think going back to where Andrew was, if we're going to set a second reading and hold a public hearing, it's on the map as currently sits. And if the planning commission reviews and comes back with changes, you would go forward with the process to update the map linked to the ordinance.
That's my understanding of what your of what
That's
that
what I'm
motion is
recommending, yes.
as a subsequent amendment,
Yes.
or
Is
to
it
consider as a
confusing
subsequent.
for the public at all, or not? Because we're basically presenting a map that may or may not change.
Well, right now, we're talking about the drinking water ordinance.
Ordinance, okay.
Yeah, just the ordinance. So the motion was to set the second first reading. And you had a comment, you had some discussion, but that was not totally related to just the drinking water ordinance. So I'd like to have a vote on just the water ordinance right now. So if you're ready for the vote,
If I could just, I don't mean to mince words, but
Sure.
this would be a second reading, not a second first.
no,
reading.
second first reading. So
It'd be a first, second reading.
Wait. It says second.
it says hold,
Hold. Is this written wrong? So we're
well,
Wrote it wrong then.
okay. So the motion is to hold the second reading
Yes, second
of
reading.
the
and public
drinking
hearing.
water ordinance at a public hearing on July 15th at 7 p.m. Is that right?
With that clarity, thank you, Colin. Yes, I second it, and I guess we,
okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 It's unanimous. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion.
Can you just send that language to Sue, Colin? Thanks.
Do you want to have another motion?
Oh, I would. So I would also like to move to ask the planning commission to review the map for possible changes, and if so, then for our further consideration at a future point in time.
Do we have a second? I guess I'll second that. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Abstain?
Can we have discussion? I'm not opposed to that. I guess I go back to the question I asked in the first place, which is, are we getting the ordinance work out in front of the planning commission recommendations? So I'm struggling a little bit on the sequencing of things again, and I don't not support it, but it feels like the question is being answered. Yes, we are getting the work.
Can I
out ahead.
explain my thought process just so to maybe to give you some comfort on that? So I think the wording changes in the ordinance are really important to get in place to clarify both for the DRB, for the public, for developers, what we can and cannot do. In my mind, that's a separate track from really refining this map, which I think potentially does need some refinement. but could follow on at a later date after we've updated the words of the ordinance, which are kind of an imperative to do. So that's my thing. If we wait, we're going to remain in this kind of funny limbo with words that don't match up with the statute.
Well, and my understanding is the map could be modified at any point in the future. And I'm also thinking about the timeline of we're going to be interviewing. There are 2 openings coming up for Planning Commission, and we're also going to be having a discussion in early June about the scope of committee work as well. So I don't know where this work would fall within subsequent priorities after we get the June update. So I'm a little reluctant to sort of say this updating of the map, it's not going to hold up any of the ordinances we're talking about right now. I just don't know where that would fall in terms of priorities subsequent to having the discussion about what all the committee work priorities are.
So we're taking the vote,
Just
right?
one question. Again, for the timing, maybe Paul can answer this. By having to do the map, does that in any way change when we have, because we've already voted on to have a public hearing. So the public is going to be given all this information, including this map. The changes that you would anticipate, that the ones that Andrew is referring to, would that in any way change the messaging to the public? Because we're asking them to take, in good faith, give us your feedback on X, and then, oh, by the way, it's X tweaked now.
I think Paul Connor, Planning Zoning Director, I think that is in part a question for you all in terms of how you want to present your policy questions. I think the areas that Councilor Chalnick, if I'm understanding, is most interested in are areas that are zoned either agricultural institutional or perhaps city-owned parcels where housing as defined under Act 47 are not permitted in either. So it is from an Act 47 perspective, a different conversation. From a big picture, it is a related conversation about focuses of development and not development. So I think that's somewhat for you and the commission to assess as to how you want to present messages and discuss the ongoing efforts of land use planning in the city that is happened for 70 years and will continue to happen for generations to come. So I don't know that I can answer more fully beyond that.
But when we would have this hearing that we've already talked about, this could be then explained to the hearing that this additional process, this map you're looking on, is actually under, because I think it's very important about being as clear and open and be clear intent. So that would be possible to do in the context of a hearing, to say, and the map you're looking at is now also with the planning zone, so the community that is, the public writ large that is looking at it understands that this may be a work in progress. This is, and a little bit about what may come out of it. Because if you're going to take the time to weigh in and give your judgment, your question, am I making a judgment on a moving target, or is this what is being proposed, and if I don't share my judgment now, this is what will proceed.
So can I jump in on this? Stepping back for a minute, I think it's important from a governance perspective to understand that all ordinances or land development regulations are 80% right? We're always going to work on them. We're always going to fine tune them. The purpose of setting the public hearing is to be very clear to the community of this is what we're considering adopting right now. We might tweak it next month or next year, but right now this is what's before the council. So I think from a governance perspective, the question before you right now is, are you comfortable enough with this map to say that it tells a clear story to the community about the implications of the state law change and how we're going to update the ordinance, with the understanding that fairly quickly following that, the map could be tweaked? And from a governance perspective and a community engagement perspective, how comfortable are you with that?
And also it stands to a fact that the map could also be tweaked based on what we hear in the hearing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So it is a process in flow. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for the explanation.
So we have a motion and we've taken a vote, but we have 2 people that haven't voted yet, 2 councilors. So Do you have a vote?
Yes,
What is it?
I support it.
Okay, so an aye, and
Yeah, and I'm going to vote no, really not understanding where updating this map would fall in the priorities of the Planning Commission post the presentation in June on the updated LDRs.
okay. So we have
Thanks.
3 ayes and a nay. And hopefully Sue can tell that Elizabeth voted nay, right? All right, so the motion carries. All right, we're gonna take a break right now for 5 minutes. Well-deserved break. The Sextons have been hanging on. We see you. To staff.
Thank you. Well, can we go back, Jesse? We have worked a lot over the last 6 years. So top one up there, we've actually had the cemetery sonar to kind of figure out where we have open land, where we don't.
Hey, Donna, do you want to introduce who's here
Okay.
with you?
Oh, sorry. I'm Donna Kinville, current chair of the Sextons.
Jason Kurchik, member on the Sextons.
I'm John Simpson, and a new member, new appointee on Sextons Committee.
Peter Taylor.
Peter and I have been on as Sexton since 2018 when there was a revamp. We only had one current Sexton who was Bill Szymanski. I get Simonetti, Szymanski mixed up. And so I encouraged the city council, the city manager at that point to revamp the Sextons. And I volunteered, and I think Peter got coerced or caught at an election one time, and Tom Chittenden were the original 3. And so in the meantime, we had 3 people who knew nothing about cemeteries. So we were learning from the ground up. So the first year we were in existence, it was a lot of learning. And so, sorry to say, the first time we actually got the grounds sonared because we weren't sure where we had open spots and didn't want to sell lots that were already occupied. We've done a lot of work on trying to repair, and those 2 top ones is one stone up in Shelburne Road Cemetery, the one before and then after. So I think we do pretty good work. It looks straight. The one on the bottom kind of shows you down on Shelburne Road that the fence line and the brush is overlapping some of the cemetery plots, and we keep hoping to get that cleaned up. And then again, this is just showing the bottom one. Some of the bigger stones, it takes a lot of manpower to correct and redo some of these stones, and actually a fair amount of them are broken. And we've had to patch them and clamp them and let them dry, and so we've done a lot of that as well. So, next one. This is our annual report. We want to thank Maureen O'Brien and Chris Train, who were members of the Sexton Committee, or were Sextons. Both Jason and John are new members of July of this year, so they're getting up and running and what we have going on. Go to the next. This is you, Peter.
Oh, this, me?
Yep.
All right. Sexton, officer charged with the maintenance of the.
Pull it close to you.
Oh, okay, got it. Sexton is an officer charged with the maintenance of the surrounding graveyard. This is just a definition. The legislation does not provide a definition of a sexton. It's just referenced in there. So you can go to the next. In the summer of 2023, where are we here? Okay. Appointed members in the summer of 2023, Donna, Peter, John Simpson, and Jason Kurchik. A cemetery commission, if no other body is identified in a town, is the city council. So you folks are the cemetery commission. And by statute.
And that's one of the things we've kind of struggled with, because sextons, this only mentioned once in the, I think in the in the statute, and it's just basically a caregiver of a cemetery. And in the past, we didn't really have Sextons. We had a cemetery commission. They kind of did everything. And then it kind of moved to Sextons for somehow, and that's what we are. And one of the things we've been kind of struggling with since we became Sextons is where we fit and what do we do. And so we've struggled. We're taking care of it. We're going out and cleaning and repairing the headstones, and but we also kind of think we may be somewhat overstepping what Sextons are, and so that would fall to the cemetery commission, which is you. So one of the things we're looking for tonight is hopefully some clarification, or you to think about clarifying exactly what our roles are. And so if you go to the next one, Jesse.
And I'm ready. Yeah, we talked a lot about it, and I think one of the things that coming on new and hearing about the fact that, the Sextons have been operating for many years, really were moribund, and then since then have been operating pretty much under the radar. And I think it would really help the situation in terms of the importance of this job that we have, and keeping you informed and allowing, because we'll be coming at you with some ideas and suggestions and so forth. And so we would like to become an advisory committee like Bike and Ped and affordable housing and all the rest of them. And we would be then responsible for giving you an annual plan and also making an annual report. We would be able to get, when we had something important to say, get on your agenda. And I think since you are the city council and by statute, the cemetery commission, we should have a relationship, and one that is, is formalized. And therefore, I think the easiest way to do that in the context of how things are done in South Burlington would be to simply make us an advisory committee along with the others that you have in place. So we're hoping that perhaps tonight you could even make a motion and have a vote and send us out the door with that designation. But if you can't, then we'll probably hound you a few more times.
I guess next one, Jess. So this is kind of, since we started, this graph has changed. So there's a couple things we've been able to do, and we've kind of taken this kind of on ourselves, because like I said, we really was no guidance behind us of what they were doing, and acting as an advisory committee, I guess. We started looking at what we thought needed to be done in the cemeteries. So one of the first things we thought we needed to do, and as I mentioned, is to sonar the cemeteries, the open spots, just to make sure they really are open spots. So we did that, and we have the report, and we have some good information there. We calibrated the prices with neighboring municipalities, and our prices are lower than most of ours. And so we presented back in 2 years ago some revised lot prices, which we've got another slide in here, which you can talk about after. But we've ongoing. We're doing headstone cleaning and repair. We've basically done all of Shelburne Road, except there's a huge monument over there, which is going to take a crane to come in and it's going to be a huge undertaking, and it's going to extend, I guess, we've got to estimate what's going to cost and to get that done. We did a lot of brush cleaning on Shelburne Road. Unfortunately, the fencing around there is off. It's awful. It's half falling down. Olive Garden and then the auto dealership pushed their snow into the fence and has taken the fences down. And the only really way to enter into Shelburne Road is to climb over the fence that's knocked down from the Olive Garden, or to pull in from Shelburne Road. So there's some things that we need to look at there as well. But the growth has been allowed to grow away from the fence. And in some cases, especially in the back, there are plots there that are filled, which the brush has kind of taken over. And when we were cleaning, we were, oh my God, there's a blot back here. Here's a headstone. It was covered. We didn't know it was even back here. So we did a lot of that type of clearing. We've improved some of the fencing and on Eldridge Cemetery, thanks to Peter and Helen and their continued hounding the airport. They put back up the fence they took down. So we've got those things, which we're basically are still working on, but they're going to be kind of ongoing projects. The other things we have are our long-term projects, and most of these we've already are in progress, and that's kind of where we kind of feel like we're kind of churning. We've kind of got these things coming up. One thing we really need to do is we need to get a more formal plot map of the cemetery. The ones we have are really old and they're mismatched, and there's half of this and half of that, and it kind of comes up where we really need a good map of the cemetery where it mapped out, here are all the lots, and then to say which ones are actually sold, and which ones are occupied. And that's what the inventory means, is who's actually in our cemeteries. We've been working on rules and regulations in a deed, and we actually presented something 2 years ago, trying to find some way, because we have no rules and regs, or a deed, which technically by law we're supposed to have before we sell a plot. So we brought that forth 2 years ago, and we're still that's kind of in limbo and hold. And then one thing we've kind of worked on, I know it's Tom's biggest thing, was trying to make the cemetery is more of a place where people can go and reflect. And there is no benches, there's nothing for people just to sit down and reflect. And so that was part of Tom's vision, was to have some place where people could actually go and sit and just be there. And so it's kind of part of the, do we become part of the city's strategic planning? And I know I did meet with, I've been retired too long, I forgot her name. Met with someone in planning and zoning about the strategic planning, and she actually did incorporate the cemeteries into it. So there should be something that comes along with that. Anything else, Peter, you want to?
Just a question, have any of you visited either of the cemeteries? You should. Shelburne Road one is tricky to get into unless you go into Olive Garden and
Climb the fence.
make a hard left and climb the fence. There's a curb cut off of Shelburne Road. But if you go in there, you'll see that along both fence lines, there's growth about this high. We've manually cut a lot of fence line growth down. And sorry about that. Sorry. We manually cut most of that down. And I know a couple of years ago it was suggested that Public Works could go in and use a major trimmer and take care of that in the fall, because that's their least busy season. And that hasn't happened yet. And so that's one of the things I hope that we could keep that trimmed by the fence line all the way around, particularly the Shelburne Road Cemetery. And so like I say, we've been doing our best to keep it trimmed down, but it's growing back again. So I just want to make a comment about that.
So you've been personally doing that work, going in there and hauling the brush away personally?
Pardon?
You've been doing that personally, physically going in and cutting and hauling the brush from the cemeteries?
Maureen O'Brien and her husband have been doing a lot. We've done it. We've had a couple cleanup days over there where we brought volunteers in. The city brought some
Rotary Club.
Rotary Club, okay, yeah, because that's hard work.
Yeah. So we've done it, but do we have to do it every year after year? We thought we'd get a start on it and make it visible. See, this is what happens when you appoint people to do something. it just creates more work for the city. But it should be a maintained cemetery. And I would encourage you to go there and just walk through it sometime and take a look.
I'll just say, too, that I think not right away, but with some effort to make some improvements, that this could be a source, not a huge source of revenue, but certainly a source of revenue if the public was made more aware that these cemeteries are available and that we had plots for sale. There would be, I think, we would find some takers. And if we also got, because so many people now are being cremated, that the city eventually would see clear to make an investment in what's called a columbarium, which is one of those structures that have drawers in them that people pay for, and put their loved ones when they're deceased in the drawer. They have to wait till they're deceased, though.
So that begs the question, how many plots have been sold in the last year?
Well, since we became sextons and then we were having our meetings, word kind of got out there, other paper did an article, and so we kept kind of having people, and when the guy did the sonar, they came out and interviewed. So since we've taken over, we probably sell maybe about four plots a year.
4 plots
By
approximately?
an average.
Yeah, yeah.
But that being said, we're not talking about a huge lot of land. And
Yeah.
it's Eldridge, as you're facing the airport, there's a little bit in that back wall that still is open.
Yeah.
And then the whole length is open.
By Beta.
But then we've got to figure out, by Beta, but then we got to figure out if there are spots within the rest of it that are still for sale. And then in Shelburne Road, this is a whole kind of a question. It's a wet cemetery.
Yeah.
And so it has a high water table content. So we actually had that conversation about a columbarium. Do we do that? So we've had all these ideas and thoughts, but we just really kind of didn't know how to bring them forth.
Have you priced a medium-sized columbarium of like 16 lockers?
No, we can though.
I think I've seen them that are about $10,000 for
Yeah.
20 spaces.
Yeah.
So, if we charge $500 as we are talking about, we break even, but we might want to,
We should buy 10.
yeah.
One of the things we have to do, though, is it's the fourth item down, formal plot maps.
Yeah.
Because the maps we have now show approximately where the graves are now that we've sold or are in use. But it doesn't plot out the other plots that could be sold. So when we're selling a plot, we don't have any geographic boundaries for it, where that plot is.
And part of our problem in all this is, of course, COVID hit in the middle of our planning sessions and trying and do this. And in the formal plots map, it used to be all handled over at the highway department, because Sonny Audette was one of the sextons. So we have this book that Karen had, the secretary, and then we have this map, and then we have all these bits of information, and we're trying to pull that together and actually physically put it into the map. And it is
GIS.
confusing. So we asked Paul Healy, who's an expert in the state on cemeteries, and we actually had a meeting with him to come in last April to look at everything we have and give us an idea of how do we even start putting this information together. And that's when the floods hit, and then one of the cemeteries someone got washed away, and his attention got diverted. So we've got to contact him to see about having him come back in again. But that's gonna be a lot of work to do that.
Have any plots been sold in Shelburne Road?
No,
Or is it all Eldridge?
no, all Eldridge so far.
Yeah.
And Shelburne Road's kind of a,
There's a few newer ones.
well, that, we haven't sold them. They were previously bought. Yeah.
Oh, great, thank you.
Yeah, I think, Sue Allenek wanted, so we you guys gave her a plot.
Oh, right, right, right.
But Shelburne Road is kind of odd because if you were able to pull in, and that's what you've got to decide is where is the entrance going to be. If you're going to have that pull in on Shelburne Road, it's not a great option, but it's an option. If that's the case, you need room for parking. Then we have the tree line, and there's a little cut through, and then the back is the cemetery. And the lots are kind of, nothing is really much near the right side. It's more kind of right down the middle and in the back, and there's a few on the side. So that has potential to sell more. But I don't think people really know that one's really there. It's kind of hidden. And that's one of the things I like to do about the strategic planning is, do we get a sign to put up there so people know that is a cemetery? There is no sign designated as such.
Do we have a trust fund? Is there a fund like for maintenance? Is there money?
We have fund number 602. I remember, Martha. And I think the last time we heard there was 17,000 in it, and then we should have our yearly allocation coming through. That's in the parks budget for it. So we have about 18,000 in that account.
Okay, and presumably that's used for maintenance, or is that?
No, that's actually the highway department mows it for us, and they go when they do the trimming and they do all that kind of stuff. So it has really been used. The plot sales go in there. So anytime we sell a plot, it goes into that fund, and then we use it when we have cleanings supplies, and that's about the only thing we've spent the money on so far.
But we may have to use it. We may have to use it for the plot identification, plot mapping.
Who pays for the excavation to dig the hole? Is that on the family of the deceased? Or?
So the way it stands now, because there is no rules and regs, when we sell a plot, that's all we do is we sell the plot.
Okay.
So they work through their funeral home to get the lot
To get an undertaker.
dug and go through the process.
Okay.
Could I just add, we've talked to Jesse about, what should be the responsibility of the city staff and what should be the responsibility of the sextons. And historically, the Public Works has mowed and trimmed around the stones, but nothing up to the fence lines, and all the growth is encroached into the cemetery. So how do we resolve that? And so we've talked to Jesse about, well, gee, where do we go with this? Donna, in the clerk's office, when she was there, kind of sold the cemetery plots that were sold, and
still
then
does.
Communicated with Public Works about anything that she needed to with regard to mapping and that stuff. So we're trying to figure out what's our role, but what's a role and who in Jesse's office or the city office should be responsible actually for maybe selling the cemetery's plots, taking the money, enforcing the rules and regs or policies, whatever. But those are pretty well written, except for filling out who does what. And Jesse's got to decide who on her staff, if anybody, is responsible for some of these tasks. So that's where we need to go, I think.
And we know you, especially after listening to the earlier meetings, you have a lot on your plates. And so we're just trying to figure out, we're trying to take some of that off and be able to say, because unfortunately, the cemeteries were forgotten. And we're really trying to get them back into something that South Burlington should be proud of. And this is all part of it. And so we're willing to kind of take on some of that as advisory and come forth to you and say, hey, look, these are things we think you need to think about. But really now with sextons, this is kind of outside of what a sexton does, but something we've taken on. And I know you've had a long night. So if you want to go to the next page, It's just a quick, yep. So
I-
just, oh, you had a question or just next?
I have a lot to say, but I think you might want to get through your slides first.
Okay. So we just did a quick comparison of lots and compared to other municipalities. This is the same slide we did back in 2022 when we asked the council to approve a rate increase. And that increase did not get motioned and it's been out there. So we're again asking to go through the proper processes, but to have the city's plot prices increase. Whether you agree with these prices or not, that's what we're advising, and you feel free to change any of those numbers that you wish.
Do these numbers include perpetual maintenance? Or is that a
Perpetual
separate?
care?
What's perpetual care? So $500 resident perpetual care?
Yep.
Of the plots you've said you've sold, 4 on average a year, were they primarily residents or a mix of residents, non-residents? I'm just curious.
Majority were residents. I think I've had one or two that were non. Some people just like to be near the airport. They want to see the planes take off every day. So the next slide, what we're hoping to accomplish tonight was for you to consider having us an advisory committee to the city. And I know I put approved lot fees, and I know there's a process to that. But since we are just sextons, we don't really have access to money, so we're asking permission to spend up to $1,000 by the time we buy the cleaner that we spray on and the dirt and everything else. So permission to spend up to $1,000 of our fund to do our cleaning, which we'll do sometime by early fall. It's getting kind of warm to do it now. And lastly, consider increasing the number of sextons to 5. We currently have the 4, but there's a lot of work that we have that we want to accomplish. And we have someone who is very interested in and wants to be a sexton and is kind of limited is on the outside and definitely wants to become part of the group. So we're considering.
Friends of the Sextons is another group that.
Could do Friends of the Sextons. Always thinking, Tim. Always thinking. So it's kind of.
Yeah, I've looked at some of the prices at Lakeview, and this is a pretty good deal because it includes perpetual care. And Burlington raised their prices a couple of years ago. Whew.
Yeah, I mean,
So-
the stat is 2 years old, and we haven't updated it since. So.
Yeah. So I mean, I understand the needs for the rules and regulations, and my question for Jesse would be, do you have an estimate as to how much staff time might be taken up for? What would you have, 2 meetings a year that would require staff time, or
Well,
quarterly?
I don't.
it's kind of hard to
Don,
say.
I don't think that's the question. I think the governance structure, the rules and regs, who's going to be accountable, I think those are all questions we need to answer before we get to these details. I mean, so I'm just going to jump in. Sorry,
No.
I'm jumping in before the end of your slides. And I mean this with all due respect to these 4 amazing volunteers. I really disagree with how they've set this up. I think the council has treated the Sextons as a statutory committee since I've been here. So in your bylaws, they're listed as a statutory committee. We've advertised for their vacancies this month. They, in theory, have more power right now than a policy advising committee. But we haven't executed the rules and regs. We haven't gone through the conversations of talking about who's responsible for what. We haven't put together a staffing or finance plan. I think part of the problem about the unclarity of roles is when I went back to try and find the 2018, which was before me, establishment of the Sextons to a statutory committee, there's no resolution, there's not a vote, there's not any governance documents outlining what the rules and regs are. So to me, there's nothing to vote on tonight until, at your direction, some of us sit down and think about what the governance structures can be, what the legal options are, finalize a draft of rules of regs, and then put a staffing and operations budget behind this. You know, quite frankly, you've been operating fairly effectively with very little guidance as a statutory committee with the staff of a city clerk for whatever that is, 6 years, and there's nothing there right
Can
now.
I ask a question on that front? So just technical, when we sell a plot, who signs the purchase and sale agreement, and whose name is it?
Well, there is none.
But who's,
They get an invoice, which says, here's the plot number.
but
and
who's
they'll just-
who is selling it?
Donna has been administering it.
But the city is selling it,
The city
Okay.
sexton.
and who has the and second, who has the power to draw from the 17,000?
We really haven't drawn other than some cleaning we did last year, but that was actually a donation we got from the O'Brien brothers, covered that last year. So
But
we
who-
really
who-
haven't drawn anything.
So you budget $1,000 a year for cemetery supplies in the public works budget. So invoices related to public works activity is charged against those lines
But
under
the trust fund,
funds.
who has power over the trust fund?
Ultimately, I would have power over the trust
have
fund
power.
with Martha, yeah.
Okay.
It's a city fund, it's a
It's a city
special
fund.
revenue fund that
Okay.
you see in your.
Which is
special
why we're
It's not a
asking-
sexton fund.
Which
Not
is
a
why we're
sexton
asking permission to spend up to $1,000 to do our cleaning
Out of the trust fund.
out of the trust fund.
So I think my point is, I think that there's a lot more, if you all are interested in not just relying on these great volunteers to be independent sextons, I think there's legal things we have to answer. I think there are rules and regs things we have to answer. I think we owe you resolutions to establish whatever a future governance structure looks like. And then there's staffing and budget questions. to
Sounds
answer.
like something that should be.
And the sextons should have some power to draw from their fund without coming to us for $1,000 allocation, right? I mean, they should.
Well, I think that's part of the legal
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
of who owns what.
Yeah.
Jared's been working on this. He
But
can-
it sounds like this is something that can be folded into the broader initiative if we're looking at it, the committees in general.
So it could
to
be, it
basic-
hasn't been through my,
But to me, it sounds like we're neither here nor there. There are all these open questions. But for the grace of the good luck and earnest efforts of these 4 people and the other people who worked on it, there's been no mistakes that have somehow created some legal liability. But that's not a good position to count on. So I would at least suggest that we include it in the overall look at the committee structure, as part of a broad discussion of how we're going to align all of them.
Jared Pellern, Deputy City Attorney, and I want to complicate things or go too far into the weeds, but there are state regulations that the City Council has control, as we were pointing out, of the cemeteries within the city boundaries. There is another method for control and oversight of a town or city cemetery, which would be a cemetery commission, and the City Council could consider bringing that forth to the voters at another city election. And that's something that the city would have to take a vote on to establish. And city cemetery commission would then take over the role from the city council, and it would be their responsibility to oversee the upkeep and care of the cemetery. But right now, as far as budgeting under the statutes, that's something that's voted on in the city budget, and then you as the city councilors set the regulations and rules for the cemetery and would draw from the funds or pass along your duties to the sextons as an advisory committee to help you run and operate the cemetery.
I think from my perspective, what Jesse said, I agree with, because as we went through the rules and regs, we looked at other towns and how they set up their regs related to cemeteries, clearly identified who would do this, and this. And as we went through it, we couldn't put a name in a spot. And so I agree with her. And I don't, and that's a decision you have to make. And whether the sextons, I'm not sure I want to say I want to be selling cemetery lots. But some people may, and that's something you should talk to all the sextons about. But it might be best to have it in some, maybe Parks and Rec or, I mean, it's Jesse's job to figure out where it might fit And then who would do the mowing and trimming of the fence lines to keep it maintained once we get it to a certain point. So I would agree with what Jesse suggested, and the rules and regs I think are in very good shape. Colin has gone through them, made some comments. It's just a matter of filling in blanks, who's responsible for what duties.
The only thing I'd like to say is to be sure, I wasn't around, but a couple years ago, the Sextons had this same kind of a meeting with the city council, and nothing happened. So, and you know, we can go on, all of us can go on in the same kind of muddled way indefinitely, I suppose. But I think if we're serious about formalizing this operation, you all need to devote a little time to it, and Jesse needs to be given the opportunity to either assign it to somebody who, and to work with us and move this along in the, you know, in this, let's say in the fiscal year that is coming up, set us all a goal that we're going to get it done.
And the last slide is just kind of continuation about
Sorry.
what was on the timeline. So we're going to need to look to maybe to allocate some money to do a formal plat, to do an inventory of those who are buried in the cemeteries and lots that are sold and are currently unoccupied, to approve the rules and regs, which includes the deed, which we really should need to have to sell plots, and to hopefully find some way to incorporate the cemeteries into the city's strategic plan so they don't become forgotten again.
So I think the rules and regulations are really important to have those finalized. So I appreciate your recommendation here to have the right people get together to do that. And then I think things follow from that, right? Because you have two assets and one is in demand and the other one isn't, but one needs more maintenance than the other at this point. And then you have, from a marketing perspective, even though you're not really marketing your cemeteries, right? The shift is way towards cremation right now, and you don't have a columbarium. If you wanted to sell, lockers or niches in a columbarium, you need to buy that structure and have it installed, and then you probably and I kind of like the idea of one of those cemeteries, the one that would be used, which would be Eldridge, of being a lower cost cemetery that's attainable by people. You know, that if they were to go to Burlington, it's really, really expensive. And some of the other places are too, but and just from aesthetic point of view, even it's next to the airport, but there are some incredible views of Mount Mansfield from Eldridge that I've seen, especially at dusk. So there are some nice things about that cemetery, and it's also centrally located and it's dry, mostly dry, right? So we don't have to take action tonight, but what is it that you want us to
Well, can we take some action? I mean, I would love to increase the fees tonight, for instance.
I would not want to increase the fees right now. We could do that another time. I'd like to get the rules and regs, sort of in play.
So I did not ask you to take any action tonight. I think at a minimum, if you take action related to fees or establishing an advisory committee, you should do that through resolution. That's by your practice how you take these kinds of votes. You don't have anything like that in front of you tonight. So at a minimum, I would say we should bring something like that back to you. I think my larger recommendation, and different from the Sexton's recommendation, is if you want this oversight to not be a statutory group that is kind of independently controlling our city assets, then we need to have a much larger conversation about that you need to direct us, staff, to have a much larger conversation about that. That includes governance structures, rules and regs, budget, staffing, all of that.
I'd personally just like to understand. There's been, clearly some uncertainty as to roles of the sexton, the role of the city, to understand what is the expectation, what's the city roles, what's the sexton role. Is the governance structure as is existing good enough if we set that out, or does it need to change? So that's some confusion in my mind that I'd like to understand.
Agreed. I think that is where all of our confusion is, is that there is no document right now that defines what those roles and responsibilities are, but for state statute that says you all are the cemetery commission.
And in terms of the things we've been asked, I'd like to see a resolution increasing the Sextons to 5, allocate the $1,000 they want, and let's increase the fee for the lots because it seems like we're not at market.
But I think, given the fact that this was before the council a couple years ago, and there was no, you know, obviously there were many other things that probably overtook it. I think the goal is, you know, I agree pretty much with what Andrew said, but I think we shouldn't stop there. I think we should make a holistic solution, and that will help inform all these various decisions. To basically, because you know there are ultimately liability issues, and I think you know part of our job as city council is to be sure that we have the due diligence and all liability issues are concerned and all obligations we have to our community, since ultimately by the state, as I understand it, we are responsible. So we should basically create the structure that allows us to carry out those duties in a predictable, sustainable, responsible, and legally, you know, defensible, since that word came up before today, way.
Thank you, Mike.
Just one last comment.
Yep.
Just, I'm sorry. Back about 5 years ago, I was working at the polls, and Helen was working.
Is your mic on?
Keeps going off. You hit it off.
Jeez. I don't want you talking to me or me talking to you, but have it could be on the.
Helen and I were talking, and Donna came up, and she complained about the cemeteries and what was going on or not going on. And so anyways, I guess I got a email from Celine about a month later. She said, "You're a sexton." I said, called her on the phone. I said, "How'd that happen?" She said, "You weren't at the meeting." So anyways, I just saw that as the council saying, spruce them up, do something with them. And that's all we've really been, we haven't been looking for responsibility. We've just been trying to improve the cemeteries. So take it that way, and whatever you guys come up with, we'll be glad to work with it.
Thank you for doing that hard work.
Yeah, you've done a great job running with very little resources and authority. So here's where I think I am, what I'm hearing. I'm hearing 2 yeses for having some conversations to make some change around governance, fees, number of sextons, cemetery commissioners, whatever, however we're going to define them. So that's not a majority for me. So that means for me, what I'm going to do is put it.
I'll add that.
Okay, well, you hadn't yet, so I'm just saying. I only had 2. I am also going to add this to the policies and strategies list, because I feel like this could be quite a heavy lift over the year, and we should weigh that against all the other lists as well.
Sounds good.
And you have 3 now, Jesse.
Only 3.
No 4?
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you, guys.
Do we have, whoops,
Thank you.
one final thing. Do we have authority to spend our cleaning money?
We have $1,000 in the budget every year for that stuff.
Okay,
You
so
don't
I can
need-
just
you need more
put
authority
that so
than
we don't have to go, okay. I just want permission to spend it. Thank you.
All right, moving on to item 11, which is discuss and approve appointments to the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission Board, Transportation Advisory Committee, and Clean Water Advisory Committee. Jesse Baker.
So every year you have in your packet a memo from the CCRPC and from me. Oops, you have a memo in your packet from the CCRPC and from me about the annual, every alternative year appointments from communities. We are up this year. You make these appointments. So there are 3: Clean Water Advisory, Transportation, the Board of Representatives, which is their board of directors. Historically, and through many communities in Chittenden County, transportation and clean water are staffed by staff who professionally work on these things all day. I would recommend we maintain that and have indicated who the professionals are that I would recommend appointing to those 2 professional groups. The Board of Representatives, their board of directors, is where you have put more policy-oriented people because it is the board of that policy group. Chris Shaw currently serves as the city's representative to that group and also actually serves as the president of their board. So I would recommend maintaining his appointment for another 2 years. And then I think the alternate to that board should be a topic that you all should discuss tonight. Councilor Emery has served as that, or currently serves as that alternate. She did indicate that she would be willing to continue, but is also going out of the country. So you all may want to think about another one of you stepping up, or a member of the community that you would like to ask.
How does Chris get? Does Chris take direction from us in that role? Like, how does he know what we would like?
Well, that's a great question about your
a lot of
general
things.
appointment conversation. You know, there are a handful of groups that we talked about in that appointment letter where you appoint representatives to serve on regional boards. There is no other guidance to them beyond that you are appointing them to serve to represent South Burlington. You could adopt a policy asking them to get more direction from you, but historically the council has not done that.
They talk about a lot of important things. Act 250, natural resources, the Home Act, and I mean, Chris. I think Chris is terrific. I know Chris, but he doesn't really regularly attend the city council meetings. I don't think. I just don't know how he would know what the city's direction is, I guess.
In terms of Megan, if she's out of the country, you know, I appreciate her desire to still involved, but if she's out of the country, I'm more than happy. I think I mentioned this at a previous meeting. If the council so inclined to fill that role for the period that she's out of the country, or I don't know what her time frame works.
Well, are you volunteering to be the alternate?
Yes.
I think that Megan's stepping down because she's just not going to be here for a full year. So, yeah. Did anybody else want that position?
I mean, I would do it honestly. I'm still focused on the main role. Honestly, I mean, I just not sure that.
Yeah, I hear you. But Chris has done a good job. I don't. If you feel like you need to call him because they come in once per year, right, to deliver all the work plans that they have and their progress, and we hear from them and they hear from us. So, if you think you need to have him come in more than once a year, then we can schedule that, you know, but it's another agenda item. So I don't want to have a long conversation. We're just appointing these people because, you know, Chris has been on and he's the board chair right now. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. I just want to move on to the next item, to be quite honest. So, and we have a volunteer here as the alternate. So.
It's fine.
Do we need a motion for this? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I need a motion. I can't make it myself.
So it would be a motion to approve the appointments to the Board of Directors, the Transportation Advisory Committee, the Clean Water Advisory Committee, as presented with the inclusion of Councilor Scanlon as the alternate to the board.
Right. I need that moved.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thank you.
Mike, could I ask that you just keep us apprised of when these meetings are?
Absolutely. It would actually help me if I ever have to go when Chris is not there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, item 12, we need to convene as a Liquor Control Commission. Can I have a motion to go into liquor control?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. I'll say that Elizabeth seconded that. Sue? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we are now in liquor control, and we're here to consider the following applications for higher ground first-class club license and third-class restaurant bar license, and Zachary's Pizza for first-class restaurant bar license. Can I have a motion to approve these two applications?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So those are approved. We now need a motion to come out of liquor control.
So moved.
We have a motion second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So we have done item 12, which was the liquor control, and now we have other business. Is there any other business? I don't have any. Okay. Moving on to 14, which is considering entering into executive session pursuant to 1 VSA 313A1A and 2 for the purpose of discussing contracts and the negotiation or securing of real estate purchase or lease options, specifically by Interstate 89 bicycle and PED Bridge right-of-way acquisitions. And then I think we might come out of that and possibly come back into session for to execute payments, right? And then maybe go back into an executive session for something else, which is item 16. So does somebody have language to go?
So let me read the language
Okay.
and somebody can move it. The motion would be to move that the council enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing the negotiation or securing of real estate purchase or lease options relating to the I-89 bicycle and pedestrian bridge and inviting in Jesse Baker, Stephen Locke, Alana Blanchard, Jared Pellerin, and Colin McNeil into executive session.
So I need somebody to move that
moved.
wording.
So move that wording.
Okay, we have a motion and second. So we are back, folks, from executive session on item 14. And I'm looking for a motion on item 15. If somebody would have that. It's in the,
I've got it. Well, it's right on the agenda. I'll make a motion that the council grant authorization to the city treasurer to execute up to 5 payments for right-of-way acquisitions relating to the walk-bike bridge over I-89.
Second.
so we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 It's unanimous, thank you. And we'll go to item 16, which is, again, consider entering into executive session for the purposes of discussing confidential attorney-client communications related to probable civil litigation to which the public body may be a party for 1 VSA 313(1)(e) and F. And I think we'll just stay right here.
Yep.
Okay, so, and we'll be adjourning right immediately after this as well. So for those of you watching, there's nobody there, then I would say good night. Thanks for watching.
So can I read these 2 motions for you?
We need a motion to go into executive session
Yes.
for item 16.
So the motion would be to move that the council make a specific finding that premature general public knowledge of the council's discussion of pending or probable civil litigation to which the city is a party and a confidential attorney-client communication made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the council would clearly place this public body at a substantial disadvantage.
I'll move that motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous.
So the second motion would be to move that the city council enter into executive session under 1 VSA 313A1E and F for the purposes of discussing pending or probable civil litigation to which the city is a party and confidential attorney-client communication made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the council, inviting in Jesse Baker, Stephen Locke, Tom DePietro, Jared Pellerin, and Colin McNeil into this executive session.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.